This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
It's 3 minutes after 10, and don't think that I'm too weird, but I love days like today, or rather I love stories like the one involving the deal, the emergency trade deal that Keir Starmer has struck with Donald Trump. And I think part of the reason why I love them, and listen, I know I speak from a position of enormous privilege. If I was struggling with the cost of living, or indeed if I was worried that my job might be jeopardized by some of the policies announced by Donald Trump and hopefully undone by this agreement signed or agreed yesterday, then obviously I wouldn't approach things with quite the same air of curiosity and fascination. I'd have a lot more skin in the game, to coin a phrase. So I do fully appreciate that. But on the other hand, this is my job, and it is a job that I really enjoy doing on days when things are murky. And I think I enjoy it most, and I suspect that you do too, if you're honest, on the days when things are murky, but people keep claiming that they're not. If we've learnt anything over the last 10 years, it's that when it comes to trade agreements and relations with either the US or the EU, the people who claim to, or rather the people possessed of the strongest opinions are often the most ignorant. They're often the people who understand it the least. It's why, for example, if you voted for Brexit and encouraged other people to vote for it, not long afterwards you were publicly stating that people should stop talking about it. Please don't talk about it anymore. Depending upon where you get your news, you are either talking about it again today or you're not, because this is what I mean by murk. Murk in a land of certainty. So the two most, I suppose the Telegraph fits as well into that description, so we should probably include them. But the Mail and the Express, historically, and it's a position that the Daily Express has surrendered quite spectacularly in recent years, but historically they were the two spokespeople for Middle England. They were the two sentinels, if you like, for Middle England, and not necessarily middle class, but definitely Middle England or Middle UK, whatever you. And they are completely at odds with each other today, at least according to the front pages. One states, US trade deal made by Brexit, Trump's Champions League ambush. That's just a reference to the moment at which he rang Keir Starmer during an Arsenal game. And the Daily Express, by contrast, goes with UK shafted by Starmer's US trade deal. So they cannot, the two biggest Fleet Street cheerleaders for Brexit can't make up their mind whether this is good or bad, or possibly both. You will, I hope, be relieved and unsurprised to learn that I will be able to explain pretty much everything to you in the course of this morning's introduction. But of course, to do that, I rely upon others who understand things better than I. And the finest among them is probably the Financial Times journalist Alan Beattie, who essentially floats the balloon of this being a good result for Sir Keir Starmer, but not necessarily good news for the world. And what he means by that, what is meant by that, is that the capitulation involved, we're still worse off than we were a month ago, by the way. For all the talk of celebration and champagne corks popping, we're still looking at 10% tariffs on almost everything being exported to the United States that simply did not exist prior to Donald Trump's recent announcement. And not to rain upon any Brexiters' parade, because even I sometimes think we should throw them a bone just to rescue them temporarily from the misery of self-knowledge and guilt and shame attached to what they've done to this country. But they told us that we were going to be signing free trade agreements with everyone under the sun, frankly, and that we would be undoing protectionism and the like. There is nothing more protectionist in the world of international trade than tariffs. I mean, literally what free trade means is trade without tariffs, without friction, without red tape. This deal means that we will have considerably more red tape in place than we did last month. Not just than we did in 2015, but there will be more tariff and more tape in place than there was last month. But there will be less tariff and tape in place than there would have been if he hadn't done the agreement. And that's why I find it also engaging. And of course, if you completely ignore the Bloomberg finding that we're down about £100 billion a year on leaving the European Union. But as I say, good God, it must be so miserable to be intelligent enough to understand how stupid you were when you encouraged people to vote for Brexit, that I do think today let them have a few crumbs. The Indian deal was great as well, in the context of the world that we live in, but a certain type of pundit and politician can't see a deal with a country populated largely by brown-skinned people in anything like the same way that they can see a deal with a country populated by largely white-skinned people, or at least currently governed by a borderline white supremacist administration. Just have a look at that. Have a look at some of the analysis and swap round the countries and see whether you think people's attitudes to a trade agreement are influenced by the ethnicity of the co-signatories. Some fairly obvious examples of that I'm sure are already springing to mind. So, as Alan Beattie puts it in the FT, whatever short-term benefit it has given to the UK, it hasn't done a whole lot for the integrity of the global trading system. And what, of course, none of the coverage currently acknowledges is that we came to the table in a position of serious weakness. And this breaks my heart, actually. It's not an exclusively post-Brexit phenomenon. It is essentially a sort of post-Suez reality, or even a post-Second World War settlement reality, that we are simply not the nation that we once were. This is a form of Danegeld. This is a handing over to Donald Trump's administration of things that he wants in return for hurting us less than he would have done otherwise. 10% tariffs on everything except the three areas that have been renegotiated are potentially pretty miserable for an awful lot of British businesses, awful lot of British commercial interests. But it is measurably better than what we had before yesterday's announcement was made. The European Union, if you're interested, will have much stronger cards in their hand, will have a much stronger hand to play if they choose to sit down, because they're also, by dint of their comparative strength, they're not compelled to sit down and deal. They could actually seek to exert leverage back to actually have a fight. There was talk, wasn't there, of increased cooperation between the European Union and other powers, like Japan, for example, or even China, because 87% of world trade does not involve the Americans. But we don't have that option, really, because we are alone in the world. We are isolated and we are singular, directly as a consequence of a plebiscite that turned us into the first population in human history to vote to impose economic sanctions on itself. So that's why I find myself in I'm not a unique position, but in a curious position of recognizing that this deal is good in the context of the country that we are and the country that we have turned ourselves into. This is an example of the national interest, but we are not the nation that we were in 2015. If we were the nation that we were in 2015, then our approach to Donald Trump's mafioso-style bullying, nice trade arrangements you got there, be a shame if something happened to them, would be collective. We would be doing so in conjunction with some of the other biggest economies in the world. We would not be doing it alone. We would be working out responses on the global stage, as opposed to on the two-lane metaphorical highway that crosses over the Atlantic. We are alone and we are weakened. But because we are alone and we are weakened, this is good. You see why I find this stuff fascinating? It's the opposite of footballification. It's the opposite of black and white. I wish we weren't a country that had enfeebled itself on the world stage. I have, I think you'd agree, done my bit to explain why that was an act of such epic ignorance. The people who encouraged you to do it either insist that you should stop talking about it or speak from positions of such epic failure to understand the simplest of issues. You saw that with the social security conversation regarding the Indian trade agreement. Whether it's ignorance inspired by racism or just ignorance born of ignorance, I'll leave you to decide. But I speak as someone who wants what's best for the country that we are now, not for the country that we were in 1880 or the country even that we were in 2000 or 1997. I want what's best for this country as this country is now. And under that analysis, looking at it through that lens, a lens where the UK is a weak nation at the mercy of an incredibly strong despot, I put it to you very cautiously that Keir Starmer has played a blinder. Now, as another large part of me, probably as much as 48% of me, that wishes he could have stood up to Trump, that wishes he could have told Trump to take his tariffs and stick them where the sun don't shine, to be more like Mark Carney, perhaps. Start removing American goods from UK shelves, start shutting down lines of communication until the big bad bully backs down and returns things to where they were previously. I wish Keir Starmer, I was going to say had done that. What would you say? Would you say I wish Keir Starmer had done that? Or would you say I wish Keir Starmer could have done that? Because I don't think he could have done. And this really boils my blood, you know. I don't think he could have done. That's been handed to him. I'm not expecting you to get the world's tiniest violin out of its case. But Keir Starmer is playing international economics with a hand of cards given to him by Boris Johnson, Liz Truss and Nigel Farage. They've given him their rubbish cards. They have hobbled him on the world stage. They've hobbled all of us. Boris Johnson was a big enough and a successful enough liar to gloss over all of this. Nigel Farage still is. And of course, we all know what happened when Liz Truss finally got her hands upon the reins of power. Those are the cards that Keir Starmer is playing with. The same cards that meant Kemi Badenoch couldn't sign a trade agreement to save her life when she was business secretary and kept making announcements about pieces of postcards and backs of fag packets that she claimed were trade agreements, but they weren't. This is not and never will be a free trade agreement because Donald Trump seems to be addicted to tariffs. So it delivers precisely the opposite of what Brexit has told you they were going to deliver for this country. Free trade and an end of protectionism. Instead, we've got unfree tariff driven trade and epic increase in protectionism from one of the biggest economies on the planet. It's absolutely bonkers. But what else could he have done? And that, I think, is the question. 10:15 is the time. This is actually very good news for the car industry. We export about 100,000 cars a year, and that is roughly what the quota will be before tariffs actually kick in. It has saved jobs, I think, already in the steel industry. I don't know how many jobs, but it has also raised question marks over what the Americans get in return. I don't think lifting a tariff on ethanol is necessarily going to hurt me or you in our pockets. But if it's true, for example, that the Americans think it's worth about $700 million to them, then that's $700 million that comes out of our treasury. So once you have paid him the Danegeld, you never get rid of the Dane. That is what Rudyard Kipling wrote in the 19th century about what happens when you appease your Viking invaders. The protection money with which kings in medieval Anglo-Saxon England bought off Viking invaders. This is the point Alan Beattie makes quite beautifully in the Financial Times this morning. Kipling's echo through the ages. Once you have paid him the Danegeld, you never get rid of the Dane. But here's the thing. If the Anglo-Saxon kings hadn't paid him the Danegeld, then the rape and pillage would have been ratcheted up a notch or 10. And the damage that had already been done to these islands by Nordic invaders would have been massively increased. Just give him the money and he won't come and smash you over the head with his clawhammer in pursuit of nicking it. And that's why I don't see what else he could have done. 0345 6060 973. How much legal structure will this deal have? A trade lawyer at a prominent firm asked me yesterday, gesturing at the detritus of a meeting on the conference table in front of him, about the same as this napkin. And that's the other problem, of course, is that you're doing a deal with somebody who has demonstrated, not just in the course of his life, but in the course of the last few weeks, that deals he has signed are worth nothing should he have a change of mind. Should his capricious nature kick him off in the opposite direction, or should the last person he spoke to have convinced him that the deal he did and boasted about yesterday is not going to look very good tomorrow. So if you've had a chance to crunch it all, 0345 6060 973. Tell me what you think. Feel free to pick holes galore in my analysis. if you think Keir Starmer could have done better, then I really want to hear from you. Because it seems to me there were three paths he could have gone down. I think I've misrepresented what Mark Carney did. You're quite right. He didn't tell him to stick his tariffs where the sun don't shine, but he was firm and he was resilient. So Starmer perhaps could have done that, although I'm not sure for the reasons that we've discussed. And then he could have got the agreement that he's got, which I think looks pretty good in the short term for the UK, with all the caveats that we've observed previously. And then there is the a bit like Brexit. There's the deal that is much, much better but goes to a different school. The deal that nobody has actually signed, secured or described, but which various Tories will be claiming today is actually brilliant. And again, we find ourselves in that fascinating area where the Brexiters have started biting chunks out of each other. So you've got various Tories popping up to describe it as a surrender, and Kemi Badenoch describing it as the UK being shafted. But then you've got people like the world's wrongest man enjoying a bit of a stopped clock week, Daniel Hannan writing in the Telegraph about why it's a good deal. It's not the kind of deal that Brexiters like him told us we'd be able to sign. India perhaps fits into that category, but it is an arrangement that puts us in a better position than we were in 48 hours ago. What it doesn't do is put us in a better position than we were in 6 months ago, or even 1 month ago. So, what do you think? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Genuine question. Sometimes the vaguer the question, the less satisfactory your responses can be, but some days I roll the dice. What do you think of this and why? 0345 6060 973. But the angle I've got is pretty simple. Could Keir Starmer have done any better? Does he actually deserve a fairly hearty round of applause for bearding the bully, or does he deserve your disgust and anger for bending the knee? Hit the numbers now. You will get through.
James O'Brien on LBC.
22 minutes after 10. The elephant in the room, and this is the thing that I think really divides the country and gets often misrepresented as a lack of patriotism, when in fact it's the opposite. It's an honest patriotism. The elephant in the room is the diminishment of our country, not just by Brexit, although 100 billion quid a year is a fairly hefty hit to any economy, but the diminishment of our status on the world stage. And a certain type of pundit and politician seems happy to be supplicant to Donald Trump, the Mango Mussolini, but they find the idea of us being, if you like, at the mercy of Indian trade negotiators to be profoundly offensive. And I think there's a post-empire element to that. I've told you before about when I was a schoolboy and you'd see the extent of British dominion on a world map, on the world globe, and rightly or wrongly, you'd feel a weird swell of pride. You'd feel that you were somehow part of it. You look at where we sit on the world stage today, and you wonder whether some people are still beholden to that weird surge of utterly bogus patriotic pride. They still think we are major international players. So anyway, give me a ring and say something clever about this trade deal. Peter is in Gillingham. Peter, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James. In business, there's the idea of first mover advantage, and that's fine if you want to dominate a market. Starmer could have waited.
Yes, he could.
Because being small, he doesn't have that option of dominating the world, so he should have waited. There are plenty of excuses politicians can use. Perhaps he could have said, I'm chatting to Morgan McSweeney about what I should do.
This is not a morning for flippancy, Peter. I need more
really?
substantive suggestions of what he could have done differently, because I can't personally think of many. So you can see it as a protection payment to a mob boss, much more than a liberalising agreement between sovereign countries. But it is nonetheless an agreement that puts us in a much better position than we were in yesterday.
Well, perhaps the Morgan McSweeney thing is overly harsh. He could have simply said, we're rather tied up at the moment. He accepted the proposal, because I agree with you. It's the best he could achieve.
Yes.
The deal is very, very thin indeed. It covers nothing and will unravel. I mean, 2 days before, he was talking about 100,000% tariffs on films, 100%.
100%. And then yesterday he was saying that he wasn't, and that James Bond was safe. So
you can applaud it for being pragmatic.
Yes.
But and also not really worth the Sharpie that signed it. But nonetheless, I think being second would have been, or later would have been wiser than being first. And the reason he's first is the reason you've explained, that he's desperate. We're in a fire sale because of Brexit, so we need to look like we're doing something.
So I'm not quite clear on what you're saying. So I mean, if he'd waited, I don't think he would have got anything better, because he's got no more leverage, unless he'd actually threatened to take the state visit off the table, and maybe he did, but it seems unlikely. We are not big enough. I think we're 3% of US trade is represented by the UK. The whole thing has been reported very differently on the other side of the Atlantic. 3%. We're not big enough to threaten him. We're not big enough to hurt him. And so we have essentially rolled over, but not quite as far as some people were worried we might have to. Where do you stand on the moral or the emotional issue of not kowtowing to a bully, not responding to the mob boss? I love the Danegeld analogy this morning, not paying the Danegeld to the Viking marauder.
If I were in charge, which is why I'm not, I would say go away. Pragmatically, he couldn't say go away, but he could have said, look, can we meet in July? This is great. Thank you very much. We'd love to do this, and we'll tie it up with the state visit or something. He could have tangled it with some things.
Yeah, but the car industry is in a better position as of now. The steel industry is in a better position as of now. These are big wins, even without a signed document.
And if I return to my cynical position,
yes,
he staged the car visit to say, your job, this David Brent, you've got a job, you've got a job, you've got a job. So that was a win for Starmer, undoubtedly, and he couldn't avoid that. I don't believe that standing on a moral principle was even within scope on that, because he has got the jobs back, as it were, for Jaguar Land Rover. But the other thing he could have done is done an even thinner deal. Let's do a tiny little deal, and we'll talk about the rest of it later.
Or a more hurtful deal. I mean, not securing the concessions he's secured on steel and cars. I'd like to know what that deal looks like. Not the one Peter has described, the thinner deal, but the fatter deal, if you like. I mean, we live in a post-truth society, very sadly, so there's nothing to stop various Tories jumping up and down saying, look, we didn't do anything for 14 years, but we could have done, and it would have been way better than what Keir Starmer is doing. And of course, client journalists will be chiming in to agree. But they don't seem to me today to be doing what they did with the India agreement, which was either deliberately misunderstand it or just lie about what it was going to involve. I just don't know, is the short answer, whether or not Keir Starmer had any choice. They clearly see it as a win, but as Peter has reminded us, they would say that, wouldn't they? James is in Paddington. James, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Yeah, I'm very interested in your points. My concern is not, and just to go on your point initially about could he have done anything better? I don't think so. I think you're right, the cards were stacked against him from the start. Previous administration hasn't helped with that. There's also a question of leverage. We don't have any anymore. Had we still been part of the European Union, then leverage would certainly have been, something that we could have perhaps lent on. My biggest concern is what happens when eventually, and it will happen at some point, and it looks like it could be sooner rather than later, this administration, this regime, this despotic regime collapses, and you end up with someone like Vance potentially as president, who for all intents and purposes could be worse than Trump. And then what happens when we do something that annoys him? Exactly what you said. Does he suddenly decide that, actually, I'm just going to rip up that rule book, I'm going to change it, you've not done something that I liked, I'm going to be petty?
I don't think you need to have a change of personnel for that to be a problem. He could still be in the White House himself and decide that he's going to undo it. I mean, the fact that it hasn't been signed, it's why the first line, look, the markets have responded very positively, but the markets, I think we've all discovered in recent years, are quite excitable. How much legal structure will this deal have? Being the question that Alan Beattie in the FT begins his article with. And the answer is none at all. So it is not really even very binding, but it's still better than nothing, I guess.
And then also what happens with our other partners in the European Union, our other people that we do business with across the world. We've got a deal now, or a supposed deal with America. How does that now look, and does it play with with our other trading partners? Will we be ostracised further by cozying up to the bear, or will people start to think actually maybe the UK potentially has something here? I don't know.
No, I guess in a sense the headline writers don't know either, but they've got to have a little bit more certainty, or they have to display a little bit more certainty than you do. That Danegeld lie just keeps coming back to haunt me. Once you've paid him the Danegeld, you never get rid of him. And of course, the other element of us now essentially detaching ourselves from any international prospect of resistance. There were noises being made by the EU, by CPTPP, that they would somehow fight back, that they would resist. Gordon Brown. I wonder what Gordon Brown thinks. Gordon Brown was the one who gave me that statistic. He wrote a wonderful article in which he pointed out 87% of the world's trade is not done with America. We don't have to roll over. I don't think we have rolled over, particularly. I guess if I was a beef farmer, I might have slightly different views, but the wider implications may be the biggest impact or the biggest result of what has happened today. The wider implications of us being the first to fold, if you were, the first to bend, because what we've done is accept the 10% tariff on everything else in a way that other countries, perhaps more powerful unions, more powerful trading blocs, may be able to resist. I don't know. What I would like you to do, though, 10:31 is the time, is if you can, so I know it's a bit nebulous, but how much of this breaks down according to the perception of the UK? I have a crack at just telling me how powerful is the UK now in a negotiation like this? How much heft do we really have? Because people still talk as if we are incredibly important players. And according to some measures we are. But if you've got a market of 60 million people, you are wielding a fraction of the power of a market of 500 million people. I just want to, if we can, dig into that. But also, the phone lines are open for you to tell me what you think of this deal. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Thomas Watts is here with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:34 is the time. I don't know whether it will sway any votes, but I can see why some people might feel that Keir Starmer has betrayed principles, but of course he's never claimed to have any. I don't mean that as an insult. He is Mr. Pragmatic. He has no ideology, and you may see that as a strength or a weakness. If Trump continues down the path towards fascism, then the appeal of the idealistic argument that you shouldn't be doing anything to appease or cozy up to somebody behaving so hideously is pretty powerful. But we've discussed this quite a lot. And, until you actually invade Poland, metaphorically speaking, or obviously historically speaking in the context of Nazi Germany, until you actually invade Poland, pretty much everybody tries to keep you on side. Up to and including the owner of the Daily Mail, if you want to go back to the 1930s in this country. So I don't know. What could he have done differently? Realistically or idealistically, whichever you prefer. Sarah is in Bootle. Sarah, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello, Sarah.
Well, having heard the gist of this so-called trade deal, I think that in the long term, and I can see this with Trump, it's going to be America's gets the mine, we get the shaft. Because as Trump is well known for, to put it into basic language that a politician would understand, Welsh on every deal that he's done since he's been in office. Yeah. We've only got to take a look at Canada. I can see this now. Oh, by the way, we want all your data from the NHS. While we're at it, we'd like to get in there.
I could say that he's going to love you forever and give us everything we ask for. I don't want to get into too much hypothetical or counterfactual. He is not a reliable partner, exactly. But he is an incredibly powerful partner, either potentially or actually, and therefore to ignore him and possibly even to enrage him would be foolish. I think if I was Prime Minister, I would have been a bit like Hugh Grant in Love Actually, but that may have been the worst imaginable outcome for the country. It possibly would have been allowing ego to override national interest. I want you to tell me why this isn't in the national interest, confining yourself to facts as opposed to fears.
No, it's not so much fear. It's just going by the form book.
No, that's fine, but it's a fear of the form book.
Yeah. Well, anyway, to be perfectly honest, in the national interest, and looking at Keir Starmer, who is basically, he'd do anything for he'll let anything happen.
Right.
He has got no principles. He's got no ethics, which for a lawyer is very good, but for a prime minister is not good, because you've got to be able to know good from bad.
I'm not hearing any facts yet, Sarah, respectfully.
No, we're getting up to the facts. I'm just explaining him. Thing is, as a prime minister, he is supposed to he's got to look out, for the national interest, and
which he has done.
In theory.
No, in actuality. I mean, the theory is you saying that he's going to Welsh on the deal and he can't be trusted, and I might agree with you on that, but that's a theory. In reality, what was agreed yesterday sees our steel industry and our car industry relieved of any tariff responsibilities whatsoever. We hope that will stick. Let's just put it that way. Yeah, but there's no point us continuing a conversation that is predicated by the possibility that it won't. We're talking about what has been agreed, not the possible next chapter of that story where what has been agreed gets unagreed. Unless you think that we shouldn't have signed any deal at all with Donald Trump because he can't be trusted, in which case you're coming at it from an entirely different angle. I told you it was nuanced. It is 10:38. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Pat's in San Pedro in Spain. Pat, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. Thanks for having me back on again. We spoke a couple of weeks ago about the bin fire that's Trump's brain.
Oh, well, that's a good background, a good context for this conversation then, isn't it?
Well, it is. It links rather well. No, I think you sort of posited the question. So what is wrong? What is it that makes the UK weaker, and what could have been done differently or better? I think the first thing is, yes, of course, we're weaker. We're already a slowing economy. Our GDP is growing at one of the slowest rates, regardless of what anyone says about where we sit in the G7.
Sure.
And of course, without making this a Brexit discussion, we've been massively hampered, a complete cell phone by the whole Brexit deal. But it's because of the Brexit, the EU, that what I think Starmer should have done, and by the way, I do disagree with your immediately previous caller, I think Starmer may be many things, but I think the guy has got decent morals.
Yeah, I agree with you. He might not have an ideology, as in something that he thinks is more important than the national interest, something that trumps, for want of a better word, the national interest. But no, I thought it was unnecessary to be that personal.
Yeah, I didn't think it was necessary or relevant, really. I think the thing with Starmer is that I just wish the guy was a bit braver. So my view is that you mentioned earlier on in one of the calls that about Trump's capriciousness. That is a double-edged sword, because his capriciousness can also manifest when he's stood up to and he has to back down, and he backs down as often as he goes out there and starts beating his chest. Now, if Starmer, and I'm sure this conversation was had with the likes of Macron and maybe Merz, but Merz is newly sort of positioned on the scene. But they could have done is said, look, let's not any of us go alone into the bear pit that is a US trade deal discussion. Let's actually come together and have a European response, not an EU, a European response.
Like we've done with Ukraine.
Exactly. So, Starmer could save face, not say that he's ratting on the whole Brexit thing, but just say, look, we're doing this for the safety of numbers so that we get a good deal for us that just happens to work for Europe too. And of course, what would be great about that is if it worked, and I would put a 70% likelihood on it does work, it would work, then there is a wonderful precedent to say, now then. Now, what else can we do if we were back where we belonged? So it could deal with them, I think, get a much better deal out of Trump, without a doubt.
The EU could get a much better deal out of Trump because they've got more on the table, and we would not be part of that because we would not be part of the single market or the customs union.
But in what I'm positing forward here is that we would be part of it. It would be a deal done between the UK and the EU, that the UK is entwined within the EU's trade agreement with the States. We could negotiate
collectively, specifically on tariffs, I suppose, even if we didn't have free movement of goods within our own territory and theirs. So it's a sort of form of collective bargaining.
Yeah, the tariffs would be a start, but I think it could also push itself into releasing some of these sort of stigmas on free trade across the European continent. Because, when good things happen with the discussions with Trump and you start getting some wins, then all of a sudden, there are very different conversations about the freedom of trade within the EU.
Let me run a couple of things by you that have popped up in my inbox. This is from David, who says, if your daughter or son was being bullied and having their lunch money stolen, and they made an agreement to stop the bullying by regularly giving half of their lunch money to the bully, would you congratulate them on a good deal?
No, I would take myself into a corner and give myself a good beating for being a poor father, for allowing them to be in that situation and not going to the school and standing in front of that bully and dealing with him.
This is the danger of analogies, isn't it? Is that you could take them too literally or not literally enough. And Jane picks up a similar theme as she says this tack on accepting Trump's behaviour just doesn't feel right. All bullies return for more. And that brings us back to Danegeld. And Starmer hasn't set any boundaries. He's a bit of a bully as well with regard to purging MPs. But aren't we talking about whether Trump will just come back for more?
Well, around the purging of MPs, I think that's an entirely different conversation.
No, I do too, but I'm going to read it out, aren't I? So it's only fair she sent it to me. But the idea of Trump coming back for more, even as we pay the Dane.
But he will do. But then, as I said earlier, the capriciousness can cut both ways. He'll come back for more. If he beats you into a lifeless pulp, he'll want to keep coming back and having another kick. If you stand up, and if you stand up not as an individual but as a collective, and you say, hey, it's not going to happen that way. I mean, just as Xi will win in the China-US trade war without a doubt. And the EU could win with that same level of solidarity. So he won't come back for more. He's just as likely to step back when he's been attacked back by a proper strong unit.
Well, we've seen that. We've seen that. I mean, in the room actually with Mark Carney, and with China, with Xi Jinping, just really crumbling. But I don't know that Starmer is possessed of the heft to have exerted that sort of power on him. I mean, the unique nature of the UK, albeit that we still sit quite high in the size of world economies, the leverage it gives us is negligible compared to Canada's unique trading relationship with the European Union and the sheer size of the Canada's unique trading relationship with the USA and the sheer size of the European Union or China. I'll read you, thank you for that, Pat. I'll read you the final paragraph of this piece in the FT that has impressed me so much. The UK can make a political choice, certainly. It can opt to pay the Dane. It's managed to escape the worst of the Trump tariffs for the moment. And then the bit that Daily Mail journalists will not be able to understand, but the promise that post-Brexit Britain would prove to be an unshakable anchor of the rules-based international trading system looks weaker today than it did before. You may not also have known that yesterday the EU revealed its latest list of retaliation targets, and there's an argument that those efforts have been undermined a bit by Starmer becoming the first leader to effectively accept the new status quo. And the new status quo involves 10% tariffs on almost everything except the bits that you can negotiate away. China, Japan, the EU have all resisted being bounced into quick agreements by the US. It's why, and I'm not sure my introduction was vintage this morning, because that is the question I was really trying to push, was whether or not Starmer had any choice but to be bounced into an early deal. It doesn't matter whether the Daily Mail wants to pretend it's a benefit of Brexit or any of those things. Did Starmer have any choice but to be bounced into it? Because when you see the territories that are resisting Trump's bullying, most obviously China, Japan and the EU, it's fairly obvious what they have that we don't. We always discuss, if we can, if he's available, Trading Matters or Matters International Trade with Dmitry Grozobinski, the founder of Explain Trade, former negotiator himself and author of the book Why Politicians Lie About Trade. I'm not sure his counsel has ever been more needed than it is today. So we'll get it after this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is It's 10:49. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Matt asks, did Boris Johnson get this level of criticism when he gave the whole shop away to Australia? Well, he did from me. It was much, much worse, that deal, than anything that Keir Starmer has agreed to yesterday. So much so, of course, that they were laughing about it on Australian television, something that the British media was oddly reluctant to pick up on. But, of course, that was also a proper trade deal. That was a formalised and signed, neither of which apply to what happened yesterday. So, I mean, the central question of whether or not Keir Starmer could have been more robust in his dealings is one we may return to. I've got a little clip of the phone call, actually, which really plays into the question of whether or not he's being a supplicant or whether or not he is being a genius manipulator of a man-child, or a little bit of both. But I thought we should probably get the trade expert angle on what is happening, and hopefully we'll have time to have a little look at the India agreement as well. Dmitry Grozobinski, as you should know by now, is the founder of Explain Trade, author of the book Why Politicians Lie About Trade, and on the line now. Who's lying about trade this morning, Dmitry?
Unsurprisingly, pretty much everyone. It's every time a free trade agreement hits the headlines, my blood pressure spikes about 320% as people start saying fairly crazy things about it. In this case, I think we have the US massively overselling what they got from the UK. You have the UK somewhat overselling what they got from the US, and you have a number of people scaremongering about what this will mean and trying to scare people with the idea of hormone beef on their shelves, which is also a misrepresentation. So no one's covering themselves in glory this week.
Let's be the exception, Dmitry, with your help on this program. I mean, the hormone-related beef, I think, we can say with some certainty that is not coming here.
That's absolutely right. Yeah. What this deal did was create a quota from tariffs. So 13,000 tons of US beef that are allowed to be sold in the UK, so that meet UK standards, including being hormone-free, will now be able to enter into the UK without paying tariffs. That's not a huge amount compared to the sort of tens and tens of thousands of tons that, say, Australia gets under the free trade agreement, but nothing has changed about what meat has to be in order to make it to a UK supermarket shelf.
So our standards remain sovereign?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Print that on the flag, James.
I shall indeed. Our standards remain sovereign. What might we realistically celebrate on this side of the Atlantic, if anything? Because, of course, a lot of people are not ignoring the fact, but perhaps somewhat glossing over, and this was probably what Trump was banking on, that the 10% baseline tariff has gone nowhere.
Right. The 10% tariff is still in place, and that is bad. But what this deal does is deal with a much more critical and pressing issue for the UK. The UK had a real problem, which is that it has a steel industry and a car industry, especially a luxury car industry, both of which were under a lot of pressure, in the case of steel especially, and which are dependent on the US in the case of cars and luxury cars. And those were facing a much higher than 10% tariff. So for cars, I think it was 27.5. For steel, it was high. This deal deals with that. Now, for those car industry especially, that was very, very important, because you cannot simply pivot if you sell cars neatly from one country to the next. You can't just ship them to another country and start selling them. You need an entire network of vendors, distributors, service. You need brand recognition. And the US was the UK's largest customer. So one thing to celebrate is that is no longer nearly as big as a problem as it was last week.
And there wasn't much room for waiting on that. I mean, there could technically have been room for waiting, but the impact was only going to get worse with every passing week.
Absolutely. These are not factories you can simply, shut down for a while and then restart when things get better. This was a pressing issue that had real impact on real people. I was listening to your callers before, and the bullying framework, the extortion framework is an absolutely valid way to think about this. I would just urge people to remember there were no good answers here. The thing about negotiating or not negotiating with hostage takers is it's a hard choice because there are hostages.
And then that's the role that the tariffs play and of course continue to play, but in specific sectors, and as you've explained, hugely important sectors and vulnerable sectors, they play a much smaller role than they would have done in the absence of this agreement. And then how does it cut the other way? What have we surrendered? What suboptimal surrenders have we made?
So it's from reading the deal, and again, we don't have any details. So what it looks like, which you can imagine what that's doing for my stress levels. Yes. But what it sounds like the UK has done in terms of concrete offerings is increased access for lower tariffs for beef, as we said, up to 13,000 tons. And it sounds like they may have also increased access for ethanol, so biofuels, into the UK. Now, the UK has some ethanol producers of its own, so that'll mean more competition for them. I don't at all know the economics of that sector, and I won't pretend to.
It's environmentally friendly, though. I think the ethanol is used to reduce pollution in fuel, isn't it?
Someone was mentioning it's also potentially an ingredient in some beers, which I found shocking. Yeah. I have no idea. I'm repeating what someone said.
Fine. But these don't sound like these sound like a smaller beer, if you pardon the pun. Yeah. They sound like smaller beer than the steel and cars, almost as if, despite this being extortion because of the baseline tariff, we've got more out of it than we put in. If you take the status quo as being what it was yesterday morning rather than what it was last month.
So what makes this whole thing so infuriating to try to talk about is what you just said is exactly right. In the sense that if you look at what has just been traded, it's a reasonably good deal for the UK by any measure. The price the UK paid to deal with this acute pain in cars and in steel was comparatively low. On the other hand, most of what the US was trading away is something they just invented 2 months ago.
Yeah.
So they effectively printed their own currency and then paid us with it. Or paid the UK with it, I should say, which makes this hard to judge.
Indeed, it does. And a quick word on the likelihood of this agreement being followed by the full trade agreement that is perpetually on the horizon over the course of the next year, and what this agreement has done to our position in that negotiation.
I don't think it's hugely likely that this metastasizes into a full free trade agreement. For one thing, the US is very clearly still figuring out where it wants to apply fresh new tariffs. So even as this deal got done, one of the things they didn't talk about was pharmaceuticals, because the US will apply higher tariffs on pharmaceuticals in the future, but doesn't know what those are yet. So all this deal says is basically the UK will get some special treatment there, but that special treatment has been undefined. Secondly, I think the Trump administration has very little interest in doing something that will require ratification from Congress and require and kind of lock him in with something that is passed by Congress. He is much more comfortable doing these stroke of a pen deals where he's the one wheeling and dealing, the Trump giveth and the Trump taketh away.
And of course, a growing amount of the US media is complicit in that process. You're very good at this, so I would, even though the time is limited, ask you to just cast your eye over the India agreement that was also announced this week.
So again, we don't have the details there, but I think what people need to understand about the India deal is that unlike Australia, which is already a really open market, so in a free trade agreement, there's just not that much the UK can get from Australia because you're already pushing on a door that's as open as it's going to be. India is one of the most restrictive major economies in the world, probably the most restrictive. And so there was quite a lot of room to improve the access that UK firms get into India. And it sounds from what we've heard like they've managed to do that quite considerably. I have frankly been horrified by how much of the coverage has apparently fallen on this issue of about 100 visas a year for intra-corporate transferees. I think that's a profoundly immature way to talk about national policy in
this
a G7
Brexit
economy.
Britain, mate. That's how we do things here.
It's what we do, apparently.
Marks out of 10 for Starmer then on both of these agreements this week? Or is that too facile a question?
Well, I think if you're a steel or an auto worker, you'd be giving him sort of an 8. If you're anybody else, you're sort of giving him somewhere around a 3 or a 4, but that's sort of, it's not clear too many other people would be able to get higher marks.
To get a gent, yeah, okay. So there is a better deal, but it goes to a different school kind of territory. Dimitri, thank you. Dimitri Grozobinski, author of the book Why Politicians Lie About Trade, demonstrating, I think, in spades why he's the person we turn to first. If he's available whenever we need help understanding issues like the ones currently in front of us. Also founder of Explain Trade. Thank you very much indeed. I do want to play you that little clip of Trump talking to... I'll do it after the news. Keith's getting a bit upset about how late we're hitting our junctions, and I always keep Keith happy. Keep Keith happy. That's the other thing I'm going to have on a T-shirt. Our standards are sovereign. Our food standards are sovereign. No hormone. So poor old Jacob Rees-Mogg, his dream of poor people having to feed their children hormone-injected beef remains a way off, and chlorinated chicken won't be on a menu near you anytime soon, despite some of the stupidest people in the world thinking that would be a perfectly acceptable price to pay for. I don't know what they were going to get in return, but it certainly wouldn't have been their children that were being required to eat it. It's 11 o'clock.
James O'Brien on LBC.
2 minutes after 11. I'm in the horn of a dilemma. I'm minded to respond to the breaking news that you have just heard, not necessarily in the way that you would expect, but we also need to talk about the Pope. And I like to be a little bit more light-hearted on a Friday at 12 o'clock, if I possibly can. And of course, there are many days, many Fridays when I can't. And I suppose I don't know. A conversation about the Pope doesn't sound very light-hearted, does it? But nor necessarily does a conversation about these two buffoons who chopped down that tree. I think we'll go there. I think we'll do the tree this hour, and then we'll do the Pope in the next hour. And also, let's just remember that we are colleagues in a sense. I know that we don't necessarily work together, but we're the people that we chat with. You are the people I chat with when I'm at work, and I am the person you chat with, either actually or just in your bonce in your head when you're at work. So this is the kind of conversation that we should probably have together more often, as if we were sitting around the same table in the canteen. Let's just hope there's no one at the next table showing people proof that Michelle Obama is a man. If you don't know what that refers to, then you have not been listening to this program very much over the last 2 or 3 months. But if we worked together, this is what we would now be talking about. Weirdly, and that's part of the conversation. Why? We've got a brand new Pope and trade deals, or trade agreements at least, with India and the United States of America. And the story that has grabbed your attention the most is the story of two buffoons who chopped down a tree. It just is, isn't it? It just is. There you go. Karen's already been in touch to say, those tree killers make me so mad. And over the course, I'm not being performatively contrarian here. And the question of what sentence they should receive is one that we may have time to pontificate upon this morning. The jury just started a second day of deliberations, just over 5 hours in total before they returned with the verdict. Over the course of this trial, I have found myself becoming increasingly puzzled or engaged or whatever the word you prefer may be. And man, you know the number, right? 0345 6060 You may have to jump in and save me on this one, because it seems on the one extreme, and when it first happened, I felt a visceral rage. I was horrified. I know the tree. Well, not personally, but I do. Yes, I've seen the tree. I know Hadrian's Wall. I don't get there often. It's very far away, but it's beautiful. It's absolutely. I've stayed at there's a wonderful. I don't know whether this is going to see them inundated with applications, but it doesn't matter, does it? So there's only a finite number of beds, but there's a youth hostel on Hadrian's Wall that is a wonderful place to stay, and I have stayed there. The walking up there, everything. Look, you don't need me to sell you Hadrian's Wall. So when this first happened, the reaction I felt was unexamined. Okay, the reaction I felt was one of rage and one of no compunction whatsoever to do any deep thinking. Okay, I usually feel the compunction to do some deep thinking kick in the moment I start feeling rage. It's not very fashionable in this country at the moment, but if I feel anger at something that has very little to do with me, I immediately start trying to work out why. It's partly a lesson of therapy, actually, rather than just letting your anger go and going off on some mad rant, which I perhaps used to do rather more often than I do now. You try to work out why I'm angry. But I didn't do it on this one. I sat here being angry and quite upset. I didn't stop to work out why. And I don't know what, probably because it was a tree. So quite bizarrely, I spend less time analysing my anger about an assault on a tree than I do analysing my anger about an assault on a human or something like that. We are probably going to see 2 men go to jail for chopping down a tree. I can say that, can't I? Well, I've said it now. It's no contempt. The jury's handed down the verdict. They're waiting for sentencing. They'll be sentenced on July the 15th. So fill your boots. We've got about 8 weeks to have this conversation. They are probably going to be jailed for cutting down a tree. Don't necessarily ring me immediately, but answer this question in your own head. How mad does that sound to you? Because it goes right from not mad at all, James, to very, very mad, James. 2 men are going to be sent to prison, quite possibly, for chopping down a tree. What do we think about that? I think, and you might be a little bit surprised by this, there are some echoes here of the Farage riots in the summer where the sentencing has to involve deterrent. Some of the things that the Farage rioters got jailed for, if they'd done them in the absence of the riots, if you see what I mean, if they'd been posting the insightful or the hate-filled messages they were posting on social media when there wasn't a rampaging mob outside trying to set fire to asylum seeker accommodation, then the sentencing would not have been the same. The same was true in 2012 during the riots in London. The sentencing is, as the French would say, pour encourager les autres. It is to encourage other people at unspecified points in the future not to behave in a similar way. And that may be the case here. Of course they have to go to jail. Otherwise, everyone will go down and chop down iconic trees for clicks and giggles. I think you're going to struggle with that one. Aren't you? You need to send out are you not? You really think that is an important thing to tell the buffoons of Britain? Don't go out and chop down iconic trees, otherwise you'll go to jail. You think there's an army of tree fellas out there? All right, there might only be 5. There's 5 people out there with axes who, if these chaps don't get sent to jail, are going to... What's the other iconic tree? Don't say it out loud. You might give these people ideas. I don't know. There's a lovely tree near me, but I don't know that it's iconic necessarily. It's iconic to me. So people do go to jail for graffiti. I think that you're right, John. Criminal damage, it would be called, wouldn't it? And this is criminal damage. 2 counts of criminal damage, 1 to the tree and 1 to the wall. So 2 men might go to prison for chopping down a tree and damaging a wall. When, as you know, people who have assaulted human beings are not guaranteed a jail sentence in this country. I don't know. Am I turning into a tabloid journalist when I say things like that? Like what's the opposite of a tabloid journalist? So I think people should go to jail for hurting human beings. I'm not sure that enough people do. But do I really get to bring that into a conversation about a tree? I don't know. I don't know. The question I didn't ask you, and possibly because it was a live criminal case, but maybe not immediately the tree was chopped down, was about why did this affect us so deeply? The massive majority of people who were outraged by this had probably never seen the tree in the flesh. In fact, if it hadn't appeared in Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, when it was scripturally transported to Nottinghamshire, I think, then you wouldn't have known it existed. The whole country, I forget what else was going on at the time, but the whole country was united. It was as if it was Captain Tom in arboreal form, this tree. It assumed a status, the like of which we have rarely seen in this country. Everyone was upset and outraged. That's a good line, isn't it? Captain Tom in arboreal form. And I don't fully understand why. The land is full of trees. Not all of them sit in such iconic settings. Not all of them are so beautiful and so redolent. But why did we get so upset about it? And I speak as someone who was upset, but here's the kicker. I speak as someone who was very upset and can still feel the vestiges of that upset, the vestiges of that anger. And I wonder whether this is going to depend at least partly on how much attention you've paid to the case, because they sound like a right pair of bozos. That's the point. I'm going to play you some evidence of their bozoness now, which demonstrates them, quotes, reveling in the media coverage. But the more I listened to it, so we've got a really clever question and we've got quite a silly question this hour. The clever question is, why did we have such a quickly established deep emotional relationship with a tree that we'd never seen before? 0345 6060 973. What did it speak to? What did this story speak to in you that made it such a massive incident so quickly? Because it's not immediately obvious. At least it's not to me. Perhaps it is to you, in which case you can hit the numbers now. But the case unfolded in a way that just created in my mind this idea of two blokes doing something for a laugh. Something really bloody stupid. Let me make that absolutely clear. But being completely blindsided and ambushed by the scale of the response. And the more I followed the case, I'm not suggesting I began to feel sympathy for them. And I certainly would never have done anything like this in my life. But if I had done it, I'd have been like 14 or 15. You know, when you do something really, really stupid, I don't know. I never really did stuff like that. But if you set fire to a bin in a shopping centre or something like that, you're not thinking at all of consequences. And in this case, there weren't any, really, except the disappearance of the tree. The more I listened to it, the more I felt, not unlike Captain Tom, actually, that the action bore very little relationship to the response. You know, the absolutely epic response was not to a couple of bozos behaving stupidly one night last year. The epic response was to something else that they weren't responsible for. Utterly mindless. Beavis and Butthead. Call it whatever you want. There's some great text coming in. But I don't know what it is that I'm trying to articulate. I do know what it is I'm trying to articulate to you. It's a description of a feeling that sits somewhere between sympathy and surprise. So should these fellas be punished? Yes. Should they be sent to prison? Really? I'm not suggesting they're so stupid we should pity them. I'm just suggesting that for the punishment to fit the crime, they'd have to have some concept of the crime they were committing. Or does that make me sound bonkers? They had absolutely no idea of the scale of offence they would cause, which means they did not set out to cause that offence. There's another story in the news at the moment about 9 people celebrating Hitler's birthday in a pub. They knew exactly the kind of offence they were going to cause. These two men, I don't think, had the first idea about the scale of the offence. So what should the court do? What should the judge do? Sentence according to the scale of the offence caused? Or sentence according to whatever their intentions were? Anyway, here is a very brief clip of some voice notes in which Daniel Graham and Adam Carruthers discuss the media coverage of their case.
Someone there's tagged like ITV News, BBC News, Sky News, like news. I think it's going to go wild.
Jeffrey, it's on Sky News as we speak.
I don't think that they're going to be applying for Brains of Britain anytime soon, or Brain of Britain anytime soon. And that isn't a defence. You know, I don't think stupidity is a defence in law. Ignorance of the law is not a defence. But there will be quite a little bit of leeway in the judge's gift here. And I think the most interesting question for us to answer today is why this affected us so much, not them. There's 2 questions here. There's a question about us. There's a question about you and about me here. And that question is, why did this upset us so much? I want you to answer that one first, all right? 0345 6060 973. Why did this, what did it speak to inside us so loudly that we responded so violently, so passionately is a better word? What passions did it excite and why? I love that question. 0345 6060 973. And then the second question is, should the punishment reflect the public outrage? Or should it be the same punishment you'd get for chopping down any other tree in any other... So you chop down a tree in your back garden against the law. I don't know. I just find it fascinating. I can't wait to hear what you have to say. It is 17 minutes after 11. The phone lines are open. 03456060973 is the number that you need. We've got until July the 15th to talk about this. That's when the sentence actually lands. It's a slightly lazier phone-in than you're used to on this programme. But what do you think the sentence should be? Should you be sent to jail for chopping down a tree? Kind of, yes, but I feel like Vicky Pollard. Yes, but no, but. Yes, but no, but yes, but no, but no, but no, yep. I don't know. And speaking of icons, cultural icons, do you think this one is true? Did you heard me earlier say that if I was Prime Minister, I probably wouldn't have signed an agreement with Donald Trump. I would have tried to be a little bit more like Hugh Grant in Love Actually. And then I got a message saying, "Oh, I love you too, James." From Martine, brackets, McCutcheon, close brackets. Do you think that's a real one or not? I think it is. And I'm taking it all the way to the bank. It's 11:18.
James O'Brien on LBC.
20 minutes after 11. There was indeed a case recently. This is one of the maddest phone-ins we've ever had. I mean, you're absolutely right. Toby Carvery chopped down a tree recently that they weren't supposed to chop down, and I don't think that was reported in the New York Times, who have already picked up upon the guilty verdict handed down to Daniel Graham and Adam Carruthers over the felling of a tree known as the Sycamore Gap, and some damage to Hadrian's Wall as well, which was damaged when the sycamore fell on it. It's been picked up by the New York Times. Breaking news, no less. 2 men found guilty of felling Britain's beloved Sycamore Gap tree in what prosecutors called a moronic mission. Obviously, the prosecutors, like me, are fans of alliteration. It's a major moronic mission, if you ask me. But there's something going on in my brain, and we sometimes have quite interesting conversations when that happens. Something about whether or not the sentencing should reflect your relationship with the tree or theirs. I don't know. Cab's in Cambridge. Cab, what would you like to say?
Hey, James, obviously you probably can't tell because I've completely lost my accent now. But, I'm not from Cambridge. I'm from Gateshead, where there's a big statue of an angel right next to where I grew up.
Done by someone who went to my school, actually.
Marvellous thing. But I used to pick mushrooms where that is now, but that's another thing.
Good, yes. So just for breakfast. That's very nice. I like a bit of foraging. Carry on.
They were very, very nice. We went for school trips to Northumberland. We went up to stay in Hexham to camp.
Yes.
And that gap is somewhere you went to. It wasn't just a tree. It's an iconic landscape, and it's part of the regional and cultural identity of the place.
It's both.
Yes. And the idea that a lad from Hexham and a lad from the northeast didn't know that, I find stretches credulity a bit. In fact, to the point of breaking. Everybody knew it. Everybody knows it.
Well, they must have known it because they didn't arrive there by accident. Right.
And they didn't just go to the park in Carlisle and cut a tree down. They went to Sycamore Gap. They chose this for a reason. And the idea that they're being punished for cutting a tree down, yeah, but they're also being punished for cutting down a regional and national and, in fact, international icon and changing that landscape. And they knew what they were doing. Yeah. So I don't quite get the argument that, well, they're being punished for cutting a tree down. Nah, not really.
I'm not saying that. I was being a bit glib when I said that. Because obviously it's not a normal tree, but it is also just a tree. So it's a question of whether or not the punishment should reflect how you feel, or whether because it can't reflect how the tree feels or the wall, can it?
But if somebody went to, say, I don't know, some out-of-the-way building and burnt it down, would they get the same punishment as if they cut down the Crooked Spire in Chesterfield, or would they get the same punishment as they cut down the Liver building?
That's a good one.
This is a cultural icon. It's not the value of the tree per se, although that is part of it. And actually, if you cut down someone's 100-year-old plus tree, that is a significant asset you've destroyed and should be punished. But it's not about that. It's about what they've done to the landscape and the identity and the instant recognisability of the place, which is globally iconic.
Can we think of a parallel? You're right to mention the counterfactual, the theoretical prospect of buildings being burnt down. Can we think of something similar when an act of criminal damage has been committed against something? I'm overusing the word, but it's the only word that fits, as you've just acknowledged. Iconic, something very special.
Where's that crooked pub that was knocked down?
Ah, yeah.
that's still rumbling on through the system, and they're being asked to put it back up. I'm not saying any more about it because I think that's still an ongoing process.
Yeah, well,
but
look at you doing your own editing. That's fantastic. If only all callers were as responsible as you, Cab.
You knock the pubs down in the wild somewhere. Nobody, like a suburban pub in a back street of Cambridge or Gateshead, nobody cares.
Yeah.
But this was iconic. And that makes the difference. The identity of the people in that place is linked to the location of the item.
You're making a very powerful case. Michael's already been in touch. He says, this guy has convinced me. Let's bring back the death penalty. And I think he's only half he's only half joking, Cab. So if I ban you from using the word iconic again, and I want you to talk about yourself, and I want to hear the voice of little Cab on his school trip to Hexham, why is it so powerful?
My relationship with trees was largely formed by education.
Yeah.
And I remember that school trip. We went to camp, Dukeswood House Camp, not far from Hexham. And we were taken through Kielder. I saw my first giant redwood. I saw my first great pine trees. And they were all phenomenal. This is just a sycamore, and sycamore is an invasive non-native species that doesn't do as much ecological good at all.
You've spoiled it now. But I didn't realise it's a migrant tree. That's it. You've just lost half the people listening, mate.
It's a foreigner.
Half the people listening want the tree to be deported now.
But it's more than that. It's about the location and what that location says about the northeast of England and what it means.
Yeah.
Later on, I saw Kevin Costner jumping up and down on it. Strangely, in a route between Kent and Nottingham, he found himself in Northumberland. He was very, very lost. But suddenly people from around the world knew a place that was dear and important to me. And that just doesn't happen with, say, the Tyne Bridge or St James's Park. But it did with Sycamore Gap. It resonated with people in a way that we just don't really otherwise have in the north and northeast of England.
I mean, I'm glad you haven't completely closed it down. I mean, your answer's very good, but there's room for other people to add to the picture that you've started painting. As if we get to the end of this hour and everybody listening can just go, oh, yeah, I get it now. That's because I don't think many people listening are going, oh, it's just a tree. I'm certainly not going, it's just a tree. But the idea. So you're all in favour of a prison sentence, then, I presume.
I'm in favour of whatever is going to make them learn to not do anything that stupid again and actually learn and grow as people. I'm not sure that putting people in prison is ever a very good answer in the British Isles, where our record of reforming people is pathetic.
Yeah.
Emotionally and intellectually, I think it's worthy of jail time, but with the proviso that our jails are terrible and not working.
Well, I mean, that's a brilliant answer. Much better than the question deserved. But I do wonder, as you say that, whether or not the prospect of jailing them does actually appeal to people for the wrong reasons. Thank you, Cab. Great stuff. 26 minutes after 11 is the time. You know the number, 0345 60 60973. Jonathan writes, those bloody boat trees coming over here. Why don't they stay in their own country and enrich their own people? I don't think we should go too far down that particular route. And that wonky pub, it's not. I don't think it is a live criminal case. There's an appeal, but only for a council's enforcement notice to rebuild it within 3 years. I don't know, but he's right. That got a response because that's not far from my neck of the woods, Himley. It's in Staffordshire. It is known, and you'd know it. You'd drive past it. It's near Dudley. And it was different from another pub. If it was, my late father always used to tell me not to avoid pubs with flat roofs. And so if it was a pub with a flat roof that had burnt down in mysterious circumstances, it wouldn't have generated anything like the interest that this pub did, because it was iconic. Why? I don't fully know why. I buy it. I felt it. I'm not like Cab from the northeast, but I just felt furious and really upset when it happened. But why? Tony's in Canterbury. Tony, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, good morning.
Hello.
I don't want to repeat what the very erudite previous caller said. I agree with a lot of what he said. I think I'd expand on it slightly. This tree represents something about humanity. People have sought solace there under its branches, have got engaged, have scattered ashes. People have simply gone there to revel in the unusual landscape, the beauty of the thing, and the fact that it's been there for hundreds of years. So it touches people's hearts. So these guys are, to use your word, utter bozos from what I can see. But they shouldn't be excused from being completely desensitized to society and their fellow human beings, which is what they seem to be. That's why I think it's become so important to people. I don't like the word iconic. I think it is something that represents the good in many of us.
That's nice.
However, However, they would not actually suffer enough in prison from my point of view.
Wow.
If we still were in medieval years, they'd be in the
bring back the birch. Bring back the birch.
No. Physical violence does not solve any crime.
Okay.
But the stocks would.
Well, that's physical violence.
Version of the stocks.
Okay, so it's the stocks. It's the cartoon version of the stocks with rotten tomatoes. People aren't allowed to throw rocks at them and things like they used to do.
There is a modern version, which is community service.
And social media.
So I would urge this judge to give them the longest possible sentence of community service, hundreds of days if possible.
Planting trees.
And the probation service to ensure that they're not sweeping up leaves in some lovely old people's home. There are some really vile jobs around, and get them out there working in the eyes of their peers, humiliated.
Final question, inspired by Scott in Uxbridge. Should you get a longer sentence for murdering a famous person than you would for murdering an unknown person?
Interesting question. The act of murder is so against all the morals and ethics of a normal
the tree is famous. That's the only difference. The tree is famous. That's the only difference that you're describing to me.
Yeah. So, no. I mean, I think that there is no difference. You know, that act is a heinous act. This act is a heinous act. All I'm saying is, if you put them in prison, you're hiding them away.
You're jumping away. You can't answer the question of whether or not a famous person being killed or hurt should have a higher sentence than a non-famous person. I don't think anyone would argue that, really, would they? And yet, we're convinced that a famous tree being cut down deserves a more serious punishment than just a normal old tree, just a bog standard tree. It's a run-of-the-mill tree. Here it comes, another one, lads. A common or garden tree. Thomas Watts is here with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
33 minutes after 11 is the time. I kind of get it, and I don't get it. And those are the kind of conversations that we have, usually only on Fridays, to be honest with you. There's a sort of crackerjack feeling, isn't there, or a thank crunchy it's Friday feeling in the air sometimes. I know you might have to work tomorrow, but that sense, and of course the story broke while we were live on air. We're probably expecting a press conference. I wonder if the New York Times will be there. In the course of this programme, it'll probably happen. We will cross live to take the press conference about the tree that got chopped down by two blokes who don't sound like the sharpest axes in the van, but who are clearly caught up in something much bigger than they ever could have expected. And I just wonder whether that should be a mitigating factor in the sentencing when it comes. 0345 6060973. And we're not there yet. We're not there yet on the question of why it moved us. Cab was brilliant, wasn't he, in Cambridge, latterly of the northeast. But why did this affect and move us so much? It is 11:34, and Gareth is in Ilkley, more famous for its moors than its trees. Although you can't have one without t'other. Gareth,
funny guy.
What would you like to say?
I think they have some good points. I picked up half of them. I lost connection with the others, but trees, they're kind of like. They're beyond time for us, aren't they? They experience the world in a different time frame to us. We're just like a dot. And I think a lot of people, they see these as like part of our ancestral heritage. People get, wrapped up. It's a bit like you're talking about examples. Well, imagine if someone went down into London tomorrow and damaged Churchill's statue, you'd get the same kind of response. But if we damaged the statue in some random spot in the country, you wouldn't get the same kind of response, but you could say, well, they're the same thing. But some of these things are perceived as being like timeless, ongoing. And I get that this tree probably isn't thousands of years old. It's probably a couple of 100 years old. But
not even that, but it's probably one of the most photographed trees in the country, if not the most photographed tree.
So what you have with that is memories. You have common stories. Remember when we took our kids there? It's a beautiful part of the world. There's a bit of national pride there with it as well. And I think the tree has basically become like a flag for everybody to rally around behind this sort of like, oh, we're all really upset about this. This is horrible. We all feel it emotionally, a bit like dare I say it, how some people felt about the Queen and all that kind of stuff. We all sort of rally around a very easily identifiable figure.
The reason I'm asking this question is because I don't think that this is correct, Gareth. I don't think that a large number of people who were feeling all of the things you're describing were even aware of the tree before the story broke. That's the difference between a statue of Churchill or the late Queen or any of the things that are baked into our national psyche. It's why Cab's contribution was brilliant but not conclusive, because he described someone for whom it was baked into his personal psyche. But it's not baked into the national psyche, and it was not baked into the national psyche any more than to pick another character, any more than Captain Tom was. So why did people who didn't even know that this tree existed before feel such sincere and genuine upset and outrage when it was chopped down?
I mean, I speak from a personal local point of view. Obviously, I'm in Ilkley, West Yorkshire. We have a lot of problems with fly tipping. You know, we've got the beautiful moors, we've got a protected woodland with bluebells in it. Someone just dumps a bark in there and disappears. Do you not think it's like the perfect storm where people are seeing a lot of this stuff going on in their area, and they're all going, such a shame, what is wrong with people at the moment? What's going on? You know,
a real sense of disillusion. Kind of no, you could be right, and it becomes a kind of figurehead for any pollution of our countryside, any sort of human decision to make something beautiful ugly, or to take something beautiful away. I love that answer. I really like that one, and therefore you wouldn't need to have a previous relationship with it. You just need to have a previous relationship with nature. In fact, Gareth, I don't know whether you knew this when you said it, but the producer has to caution me frequently not to come on air and talk about fly tipping, because I turn into Victor Meldrew. Few things enrage me more. And again, it's a story about inanimate objects. So quite how I'm allowed to sit on my high horse, asking why everyone's so worked up about a tree. If someone dumps a mattress in a lay-by in the countryside, the worst, you see, this is why she has to tell me not to do it. I've gone. I've gone. That's it. So the worst thing is when they drive up a lane. Up a rural lane through like fields or a little one of those little wooded kind of ancient pathways. They drive their transit van up there and just bloody empty it in the middle of the countryside for no reason at all. He's absolutely right, Gareth. Top of the class. 11:38 is the time. Asher is in Bristol. Asher, question or answer? It's Friday, not Thursday. Asher, what would you like to say?
Similar to what the last gentleman was speaking about. I'd never heard of it, of this tree, but it just spoke, and I did feel quite outraged about it, and I just feel it spoke to a sort of disrespect to nature. In the current world, like, nature is so precious, especially. Did you feel immediate?
Did you feel immediately outraged? I mean, because that's the first time you saw it. It's an incredible picture, and the newspapers are not stupid. They're going to pick the most powerful ones they can find, probably middle of a sunset or something like that. You just go, you absolute animals! How could you have done this?
To me, it's not even necessarily about that. I mean, there are, as someone previously said, it's not even a native species. It might not have that much ecological benefit. But I'm guessing they didn't know that. And I would feel the same outrage if it was any other tree that was hundreds of years old. It just speaks to a sense of senseless vandalism of nature. And you know that their action can't be taken back. It's as someone mentioned, it's a 150-year-old tree, and you know, it became the replacement there.
I mean, I'm labouring the Captain Tom point a bit, but in a way that he became an emblem of all veterans, so the tree became an emblem of all nature.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think that's it. I think we're moving there. I think we're getting closer. Thank you, Asher. And Asher, not previously aware of the tree. So there's a brilliant answer to the question. How can you have an emotional relationship with a tree that you only found out existed after it had been chopped down? Answer quite easily, actually. Same way I have an emotional relationship with fly tipping that hasn't even happened yet. I've got a new game, right? There is a contributor to public discourse in the United States of America called Laura Loomer. I don't know whether you've come across her or not, but even by the standards of Donald Trump's closest confidants, she is absolutely hat stand, and quite hideously so. And she has tweeted about the new Pope, okay? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use her tweet. One rather splendid American commentator has already done this, so I'm kind of nicking the idea from him, but I don't think he'll mind. He's a policy professor at the University of Michigan, so I'm sure he's above such matters. But I'm nicking his idea because I'm going to read you what she tweeted about the new Pope, and I want you to then write me a limerick in which that is the final line. Okay? So that is your Friday fun day challenge. We'll talk about the Pope in the next hour. But here is what Laura Loomer, one of Donald Trump's closest confidants, has to say about the new Pope. And I want you to use these 3 words, 4 syllables, 3 words, as the last line of your limerick. And I may break the habit of a lifetime. Well, I will have to, won't I? And read out poems on the programme. But it has to conclude or begin. So it either ends with the words woke Marxist Pope. Woke Marxist Pope is the final line of your limerick. Or, I don't know, am I going to overcomplicate it if I say you could begin it? There once was a woke Marxist Pope. Yeah, that works as well. So you either have it as the final line of the limerick, which is what Don Moynihan, the American professor, has done. I don't think he's done it brilliantly well. Cassocks are red, conclaves are dope. Wake up, babe, we got a woke Marxist Pope. It's quite good, but I reckon you can do better. Or you can turn it around and have the first line of your limerick. There once was a woke Marxist Pope. Dun 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 dun. So go on then, come on, let's do it. There once was a woke Marxist Pope. That's your challenge at 11:42. Hopefully we'll have a few entries by the time we start having the Pope conversation. In the next hour of the programme. But we're still talking about trees. Jeremy is in Wivenhoe. Jeremy, question or answer?
It's potentially a question, James.
Carry on, Jeremy. You're supposed to be answering. Go on.
The question is, are you coming from this from too subjective a perspective rather than an objective perspective?
Yes, I think I am. But, and that is the point the last caller made a bit, wasn't he, when the tree gets posited as an emblem of all
Absolutely.
of nature.
Absolutely. The reason I say that is criminal damage is a relatively unique offence in English law, in that if the value of the damage is less than £5,000, it's what's called summary only and can only be tried in the magistrate's court.
Okay.
Whereas if it's above £5,000, it's what's known as an either way offence, which can go up, and in this case has gone up to the Crown Court. And the value in this case of the damage is in excess of £622,000.
It is, yeah, 622,191, according to the capital asset value for amenity trees tool.
Plus the value to the wall, which was about 1,600.
Yeah.
So for that reason, I think a custodial sentence is more than likely and deserved.
When you were a barrister, did you specialise in defence or prosecution?
As I said to your researcher, I was a bit of a tart. I'd work for any side that would pay me.
Quite right too. Would you fancy defending these two?
I'd be more than happy to defend them. Equally,
I meant as a form of professional challenge. What might you have done? How might you have got them off the hook?
Oh, sorry. I think obviously I wouldn't. I don't have any access to the instructions that they gave their counsel, but I would have advised in the strongest possible terms to minimise the sentence and take the discount for the guilty plea.
And there it is. Thank you very much indeed, my learned friend, pointing out, of course, both the detail of the law at £622,191. I don't know how they calculate that. I don't even know what the capital asset value for amenity trees tool is. But that's the only one they've got, and that's how much the tree was worth. Again, something that I keep saying the tree fellas. This is actually very funny, but you need to pay attention, all right? This message has come in from Paddy, who's in Dublin, okay? And Paddy in Dublin says, James, why do you keep saying tree fellas? There's only 2 of them. It's 11:45.
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:48 is the time. Superintendent Kevin Waring of Northumbria Police and Gail Gilchrist of the CPS North East, indeed the Chief Crown Prosecutor, speaking outside Newcastle Crown Court shortly. Let's cross live and hear more.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Gail Gilchrist, Chief Crown Prosecutor for CPS North East. For over a century, Sycamore Gap has been an iconic natural landmark in the northeast of England, bringing immeasurable joy to those visiting the area. But just in under 3 minutes, Graham and Carruthers ended its historic legacy in a deliberate and mindless act of destruction. As news of their crime spread the following day, the pair exchanged messages, revelling in the public outcry they had caused. Thanks to an outstanding investigation on the part of our police partners, the Crown Prosecution Service were able to build a robust case against both men and bring them to trial. The international reaction of disapproval and anger following the destruction at Sycamore Gap illustrates how keenly the public has felt the loss of this beloved site. And we hope our community can take some measure of comfort in seeing those responsible convicted today.
Why
Thank
do
you.
you think they did it?
No further questions, thank you.
So that is actually the question we haven't asked, which we could ask now. We've got 10 minutes left on this. That was Gail Gilchrist, the CPS North East Chief Crown Prosecutor, speaking live. Before that, Superintendent Kevin Waring of Northumbria Police revealed that the two men found guilty of chopping down the sycamore tree that stood at Sycamore Gap had failed to offer up any real explanation of why they'd done it. They've given no explanation, never given any explanation as to why they did it. I've got a couple of calls waiting, but I could squeeze in one more if you want to tell me why you think they did it. Why do you think they did it? 0345 606 0973. That journalist just said, why do you think they did it? And they wouldn't answer her. So I'm asking you, why do you think they did it? Ed's in Maida Vale. Ed, what made you pick up the phone? Because you picked it up before I asked that last question, so it wouldn't be fair to ask you to answer that one, would it?
Well, I gave your researcher the answer to that question. For hits and giggles, probably.
Yes.
To be frank, I mean, I am a tree surgeon, and for me, one of the best parts of the job is removing the trees from a kind of technical challenge point of view.
Yes.
Not because I like destroying nature.
Oh.
But using a chainsaw, having the thrill of seeing a tree fall down is quite thrilling. As well as climbing them, the whole part.
Oh, well, that's very honest
of
of you. Of course it is. I mean, it's a trope almost, isn't it? The whole lumberjack, timber, all of that.
That's exciting. Yeah, people get very excited when we're doing it on a commercial basis. You know, people come out and they're like marveling at your skills and oh my god, like that was so exciting. Film it. Everyone loves it if it's sanctioned. But cutting down a tree with no permission is a massive no-no. And I was saying to your researcher, I have these intrusive thoughts in my local mature Victorian park. There's a lovely avenue of lime trees. I'd like to just cut the lot down one night in the middle of the night.
Because of the weird... I mean, this is an intrusive thought that you're describing.
Exactly.
Yes.
I won't do it. But
you'd never do it in a million years, but because the thrill of felling a tree is such, your mind goes to very strange places. So you think, I mean, it's almost perhaps then as if they sort of egged each other on to this.
Yeah,
moment.
I think so. Yeah.
I think you might be right.
Yeah.
Crikey. Is this a question you can ask a tree surgeon? What's the biggest tree you've felled?
It was a plane tree in southwest London. And that was a bit of a contentious one because it was an enormous, mature London plane tree. But the owner was very anxious about it because it overhung public space.
Right.
It was planned, or that client wanted it removed over a number of years and had it surveyed, inspected regularly, and there was some faults with it, so it was justified in the end. But
I can see why the work is so satisfying, actually. And oddly, you've come closest to identifying why they would have done it, because they would have got a thrill subjectively from that that challenge, as it were, from that because they apparently kept a souvenir, didn't they, of a wedge of wood. So just that would be a really hard one to do, or that would be a tricky one to do. Almost professional pride. It's no defence at all, quite the opposite, but it is perhaps an answer that wasn't forthcoming at the press conference. Ed, thank you. Take care. Stay away from lime trees. 11:53 is the time, unless, of course, you're being paid to provide your professional services. Tony's in Newcastle. Tony, what would you like to say?
I'd just like to say, I think these guys should go to jail because they've went out of their way to cut down this tree. And the cost to the local economy will be huge, and it'll be felt for years. I mean, I don't know how much they've stolen from the tourist economy, the tourist industry in the area. You know, there's an entire industry built up around that tree. There's bars and hotels and everything.
Really? Hotels? Just
it's a bar with overnight, with rooms. I suppose it's glorified. Yeah. Oh, yes. So you could actually park in the pub car park. There's rooms there where you could stay and then walk up to go and see the tree.
And people have done proposals there, and the whole. So you're right. Actually, it is. So I mean, here's an interesting development then. So earlier we established that part of the reason for the outcry, and this was from the lad who hadn't actually heard of the tree before it was chopped down, but it became an emblem for the whole of nature. And that people's visceral response to it was a response to man polluting nature, harming nature, making a mess of things. Even if it was hundreds of miles away, somehow these two characters have become responsible for much broader and bigger themes. But you've reminded it's social as well. So it's also emblematic of society, of treating fellow humans with complete contempt.
Yeah. You probably worded it a bit more eloquently than I could there, but yes.
I hadn't thought of that. So you're the clever one, not me. That idea that this is just demonstrating epic selfishness and arrogance in a way towards humans, not just towards nature. So, my God, they're probably going to throw away the key because they've managed to offend humanity and nature itself, Tony.
There you go, double whammy.
This is a
sentence twice.
Yeah, it is a double whammy. It'd be interesting to see what the judge does. I don't normally follow too closely on sentencing comments unless it's a really horrible crime. And you know, in the context of human suffering, this is not, Tony's brilliant points notwithstanding, not human suffering of the nature that we ordinarily associate with violent crime. But I'd be fascinated to see what the judge's reasoning is on this one. Kate's in Barnet. Kate, what would you like to say?
Yeah, thank you, James. I was just surprised that no other woman has called in to...
Maybe women hate trees, Kate. I don't know.
Well, I'm the opposite. I mean, I was really quite affronted by the chopping down of that tree, and the thing that I was having conversations about on social media, particularly LinkedIn, with people of my age, 40s, 50s. Why wasn't it protected? I'm completely miffed as to why it wasn't ring-fenced in some way, because I've seen other trees of similar, historical importance.
Well, it was the middle of the night. It was the middle of the night. I mean, I don't know if there was any fencing around it.
I don't think there was.
They'd still have been able to hop over it, wouldn't they?
True, fair enough. I mean, it depends on how secure it was. But yeah, I agree with you that they should be. Well, I don't know if you agree with they should be sentenced. I think you're sort of swaying between whether it requires a sentence or not, prison sentence or not, but I believe they should be.
No, I think they probably should as well now. I mean, it depends, doesn't it, on whether you are portraying it as a hideous assault upon nature itself and a display of contempt for humanity, or whether you're just describing it as two bozos who chopped down a tree. And it's both, but the sentencing has to take both of those positions into account.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they weren't the sharpest tools in the box, fair enough.
Sharpest axes in the van, Kate.
Yes, exactly, that too.
Thank you. I've got another woman on the line, so I'm going to squeeze her in just to change the quotas for this hour, Kate, which you quite rightly pointed out were previously a little skewed. Janine's in Coniston in the Lake District. What would you like to say?
Hi, James. I was just listening to the whole thing, and to be honest, what upset me the most is the fact that there seems to be a lack of just morals in these people that are getting away with doing such awful things. And it is just a tree. I understand that, but it isn't. And obviously where I live, it's so beautiful.
Yes.
I would be completely devastated if something like that were to happen, because it just shows a lack of respect. And ideally, I'd like these guys to be made an example of and have to explain what was it that led them to decide that this was a good idea.
I would love to know that as well, actually. I don't know that we'll ever get that opportunity. I could invite them on the programme, I suppose. Do you think I should do that?
Oh, no, please don't, because that just gives them the exposure that they crave.
Exactly. That was my point. I was being clever there. I was just leading you up the garden path. Because you really want to know what they say, but you don't want to give them the spotlight in which to say it.
No, I mean, I think it would make a spectacle of them to have them actually stand in a room and say, well, the reason we did this because we thought it was a good idea. It would just make them look silly.
It's like being back at school. We could just they'd be like staring at their feet and shuffling up around a bit and blaming it. They tried to blame it on each other, which I thought was I don't know quite what word I want. It was his idea. No, it was his idea. It wasn't me. It was him. But yeah, you're right. I think we should listen to the clip again just to remind ourselves of the characters that we're talking about here. Because while it may be true that they had not the vaguest inkling of what they were unleashing, they probably deserve whatever book it is that is about to be thrown at them.
Someone there's tagged like ITV News, BBC News, Sky News, like news. I think it's going to go wild.
Jeffrey, it's on Sky News as we speak.
That's the second one, isn't it, Jeffrey? It's on Sky News. Anyway, I've been inundated. I have to politely ask you to stop now sending me limericks which contain the line "woke Marxist Pope." If you're just tuning in, I can't even. But I've got about 400, which is an outrageous number, and it means I'm only going to be able to read a tiny proportion of them. So there is no more room for woke Marxist Pope limericks, and I may not find the best, but I found a few that are pretty special. So we'll listen to some of them in the next hour, but we're supposed to be having a proper grown-up phone-in about the significance of the papal office and, of course, its latest inductee.
James O'Brien on LBC.
3 minutes after 12 is the time. There is still one office, or there was when I was a newspaper journalist a million years ago, that Catholics can't hold in this country. I don't think you can be the monarch, actually. I had an argument with the political editor, and I was quite young to be picking fights with the political editor, and said, no, there is, I think, is it Lord Chancellor? Anyway, I got it right then. I can't remember it now. Lord Chancellor? There's one office you can't hold in this country if you're a Catholic. And I mention that because we have an odd relationship with Catholicism as a country, both historically and actually. And it occurred to me watching yesterday's balcony moment with the new Pope that a lot of people watching will be aware of the significance but not cognizant of it. And I'm one of them. I'm very much a Catholic in small c and big C. I mean, faith is a many splendid thing. I don't pontificate on the question of faith much on the radio anymore. It comes and goes and makes little sense, but that, of course, is the point. But I was raised very, very much in the Catholic Church. My first school was run by nuns. My second school was Catholic, albeit not actually run by clerics. It was very closely attached to the local Catholic Church. And my final school was run by monks. So nuns and monks in the course of my education. And Catholicism was a constant accompaniment to my teenage years, my childhood, right up until leaving school, and of course long afterwards, because in some ways you never shake it off, you never move on. And I remember the personal relationship with the Pope, particularly the nuns that taught me when I was very little. We'd have pictures of the Pope all over the school, and there'd be an absolute almost sense of a personal relationship. You saw it yesterday in St. Peter's Square, with nuns in a position, in a state of euphoria, real kind of arms in the air type stuff, and people bursting into tears as this man walked onto the balcony. And what? That's in a sense the question. And did what? There are two lines of inquiry here, aren't there? There is the Pope, and then there is the Pope. And what I mean by that is the job, the role, the position, And then the one that I suspect we are somewhat less qualified to answer, you and me, but not hopefully entirely unqualified. The man who has become Pope, about whom we know quite a lot, but not much, if that makes sense. A lot of you in the Limerick competition, which is now closed, rhyming Chicago with Mar-a-Lago, which I quite like. I mean, almost everybody rhyming Pope with dope or hope or both. But Mar-a-Lago and Chicago was quite good, whether or not we can find any of them in time. And of course, as many of you have reminded me, his official title is actually Bob Pope, because his given name is Robert Prevost, but that is not the name he will take. Leo XIV is the name that he's opted for. He's already criticised Trump. He's already criticised J.D. Vance. He follows in the tradition of Pope Francis when it comes to speaking up for the dispossessed, so he will have quite a lot to say about immigration in general, the way that immigrants are demonised and othered by almost all administrations in the world at the moment. And I would not be surprised if, like his predecessor, Pope Francis, he spoke up for the victims of suffering, continuing suffering in Gaza as well. He's a former head of the Augustinian order, which is kind of old school Catholicism in the sense of poverty and living with the people that you minister to. He's not going to be able to do that as a pope. He'll live in considerable splendour. But it was such an extraordinary moment, wasn't it, to witness yesterday? I don't know whether you watched it or not, but it's like a coronation. It's probably the easiest thing for British people to get their head around. It's like a coronation, and the pageantry is epic, except the emotion is even higher. People waving flags, people jumping up and down. As soon as the white smoke emerges from the Sistine Chapel, you're looking at 2,000 years of tradition and history in a nutshell, in a moment. He even speaks, the new Pope, whenever he is appointed, of being the successor to St. Peter. Jesus' great friend St. Peter being regarded as the first Pope. The rock upon which I will build my church, as Jesus said. So there's an extraordinary historical reach around going on with the office of the papacy. But why does it matter in 2025? And who does it matter to? And that's where I wonder whether Brits are a little bit banjaxed on this, because he's not the head of our church. That's King Charles, believe it or not. He is an international figure. He's a progressive. He is a woke. He's not a Marxist, but he's a woke Pope in the sense that he cares for the poor and believes in equality and probably diversity and inclusion as well. No wonder Donald Trump's lot hate him. But he's American. That's an incredible moment. There's so much going on here. I'm going to actually make some notes. An American Pope, what would that mean? A progressive Pope, what might that mean? A new Pope, what might that mean? But I think what I want to try to do, if I can, is to speak to people who don't understand why this is such a big deal. So what I want you to do is to call 0345 6060973 and tell me why this is such a moment. Why even and I know you might think this is a stupid question, but I promise you it isn't, because if you think it's a stupid question, then your upbringing and your education were probably a bit like mine. But for huge numbers of people, for almost everybody else in the country, the question of why this is, how important is the Pope in 2025, is one that I think we'd all need a little moment to think about before we could answer. So 0345 6060973. I want you to tell me why you think the Pope matters in 2025. Why does the Pope, the office of the Pope, the papacy, why does the papacy matter? And also why the appointment, and this is the bit where I wonder whether we're qualified enough to have a conversation. You probably have to be the editor of the Catholic Herald or a fully paid up member of the Augustinian order to know enough about Cardinal Robert F. Provost to pass judgment on what his papacy might mean. But you can't really start thinking or talking about the question of the role that the man will play until you've done a better job of establishing what the Pope conveys, what that actually means. So that is your starter for 12, or rather your starter at 12. 0345 6060 973. Explain to me, as someone who is born a Catholic, raised a Catholic, educated a Catholic, why the Pope matters in 2025, or explain to somebody who watched yesterday's proceedings with a sense of utter befuddlement. What on earth are they doing? Why is this even happening? How important a role does the Pope play in 2025, in 21st century life? And I think if you're from a Catholic country, you will be of particular help to us today, because we have hundreds of years of history that make it rather difficult for us to acknowledge the unique status of the Pope on the world stage, let alone in the sort of religious firmament. But I want to know why the Pope matters, either to you or, in your view, to the world in 2025, and also in an increasingly secular universe. 0345 6060 973. I think there was wasn't there an English Pope, like in the Middle Ages or something like that? I could have got that completely wrong, Richard, but otherwise, yeah, he would be the first native English speaker to become Pope. So what is the role? What does it matter in 2025 or in the 21st century? This curious 2,000-year-old office that reputedly goes back to the time of Jesus himself, and that provides what does that phrase mean? What does the phrase provides leadership to the world's Catholics mean? Because the question I'm really interested in, and I'm probably doing you a bit of a disservice by thinking that you won't be able to answer it, the question I'm really interested in is how much influence he will have. Now, who has influence these days? How much influence will the Pope have? The Cardinal, the College of Cardinals, possibly the only electorate on the planet that hasn't been completely corrupted by toxic social media and far-right adjacent rhetoric in recent years. So the College of Cardinals have elected somebody who is progressive, somebody who is dedicated to equality and inclusion. He'd look like every Catholic in the country or every Catholic in the world. He's going to have black marks hanging over his head with regard to how the child sexual abuse scandal was handled, and I'd be the last person on earth to make light of that. But how powerful is he in the modern world? What is he likely to be able to influence? I'm not embarrassed to admit I was slightly taken by surprise by the reaction to the passing of the last Pope, because I hadn't fully appreciated how he was perceived as having played very important roles in various areas of life, from Gaza to Ukraine and back again. And that's probably because I don't live in a Catholic country, so it doesn't get reported here in the way that it would do if I did. So come at this from whichever angle you please, but I'm looking to establish the importance of the office, the importance of the papacy in the 21st century world, the significance of the latest appointee, the significance of this American Augustinian woke Pope achieving the role. And that, of course, leads us into the question of how important it is today and how much power they actually wield. Come at this from whatever angle you want. Don't bother ringing me. I don't want to sound ungrateful. Don't bother ringing me to describe religion as a waste of time or to question why we're even talking about it, because we just are. So that would be a bit like, turning up on Match of the Day to complain about football being a waste of time. We're talking about the Pope. And the questions that I want you to answer are the questions that either I've asked or that sit somewhere in between them all. Why does it matter? Who does he lead? What leadership does he provide? And how much do we know about the significance or importance of this actual character ascending to the top job? 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC.
This is nice from Rich. I think, he writes, in 2025 there has never been more of a need for a uniting presence. It's important to have a sense of following something bigger than just ourselves. Too many people living selfishly. Touches a little bit perhaps on the conversation we had in the last hour about the tree. It's important for people to have a sense of something greater in their lives than just themselves and their own interests. Community matters more than ever in this age. I'm not going to dispute anything that you say. It doesn't speak directly to the significance of the Pope, though, unless you think it does. Do you want to hear a couple of the limericks before we turn to the calls, or shall I take a call and then do a couple? I'll take a call and then do a couple of the limericks, I think. It is 12:17, and we're talking about the new Pope. Angus is in Milan, in Italy. Angus, what would you like to say?
Oh, good morning, James. Thank
Hello.
you for taking my call.
You're most welcome.
I'm kind of in the hot seat. I mean, I'm not a Catholic myself, but everybody I know was tuned in on their devices watching that balcony on CNN yesterday evening, waiting for the face to appear. And it's something that touches everybody.
You mean that? So, I mean, pretty much everyone you know, everyone in Italy would have been following this as a combination between a coronation and a general election or something like that.
I reckon so.
Okay.
And that's a great description, actually, because there's a lot of pomp and ceremony about it, and St. Peter's Square was jam-packed. But my first thought to your question was, I mean, this is the figurehead for 1.4 billion people on our planet. So, you know, not figures to be sniffed at. He is an important guy.
No, but that's where my question comes from, because is he? Because I am one of those 1.4 billion people, and I don't know how much I would do on his say-so. And of those 1.4 billion people, if we just focus on the American contingent alone, millions of them, or certainly hundreds of thousands of them, would have voted for Donald Trump, who is the polar opposite of everything that this Pope stands for. But by his own account, it's pretty clear. So what does that mean, that he's the leader of 1.4 billion people?
Well, that is a good question. And actually, I think that Donald Trump was one of the fears that he may have cropped up as a surprise, especially after the meme that was put out. That is a good question, and it's tough to say. I think we're at a point where politics and church are sort of overlapping.
Yes.
This guy is one of the people that was the previous popes. He was in his sort of close circle. So I think there should be some sort of continuity, which can only be a good thing in my valuation. But I'm not I'm not deeply religious.
No, but that makes your position more interesting. So because we can see the significance, and in one level, the two-dimensional significance all around you, particularly in a country like Italy, or in a Catholic South American country, it's probably just as acute. And yet, I mean, we know that not that long ago, everything from what you ate on Fridays to whether or not you had sex with your girlfriend would be determined by the Pope. I mean, it would. Even when I was a lad, the sort of papal pronunciations on things like contraception and abortion were rules that people lived by. I don't think they still do. Certainly not in this country. Do they still do that in Italy? Do we have papal diktats?
Less and less.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Less and less. Depends where you are, and further south you go, there's more of a chance. My personal hope is that we do need figureheads, wherever they come from, who are unifying people and not dividing people.
It's so mad to hear you say that. It's absolutely insane as an Irish Catholic, or an Irish British Catholic, to hear the Pope being held up as the unifying figure on the world stage. Just over the course of my 53 years on this planet, that is such an extraordinary reversal. And I can't dispute a single syllable of what you've said. In a world where Donald Trump can become president, a man elected exclusively by men to an office that can only be held by a man, and has, to the best of my memory, only ever been held by a white man, is actually the emblem of inclusion. Whereas the president of the country that not long ago had a black president and nearly had a female one is the emblem of exclusion, the emblem of othering and opposites. We will never know, Angus and I, or you, unless you are a member of the College of Cardinals, in which case 0345 6060 973, Dominus Vobiscum. We will never know whether or not the known antipathy towards Trump and Vance played a part in the thinking of some of the cardinals. But we know, for example, that he shared an article from a left-wing Catholic outlet headed J.D. Vance is wrong. Left-wing Catholic outfit is a phrase that could only be used by a former editor of the Catholic Herald and associate editor of the Spectator. A left-wing Catholic outlet. J.D. Vance is wrong. Jesus doesn't ask us to rank our love for others. And he also reposted an accusation that President Trump was using the Oval Office to support the Fed's illicit deportation of a US resident. So he will stand up for humanity and decency, but from such an extraordinary position of exclusivity. And, as I asked Angus, and as none of us will really be able to answer, but it won't stop us from trying, what exactly does leading 1.4 billion people mean in 2025? Christina is in Ipswich. Christina, what would you like to say?
Hello. Well, I agree with everything from the last caller. I mean, South America and Central America has a huge Catholic populace, so it makes sense. But also the amount of work that goes on behind closed doors, both humanitarian and politically. And as you quite rightly said, and I've forgotten my words,
Don't
quite
worry.
rightly said, it's no longer hellfire and brimstone, thank heavens.
No.
And Italy has the lowest birth rate, so clearly things are working there. But,
who does he lead? How many people? I mean, we don't know. I can't expect you to put a number on it. But how many people do you think live by the pronunciations of Vatican II, or who truly see the Pope as more than a ceremonial figure and someone who actually provides political leadership as opposed to spiritual leadership?
I think it's more guidance in as much, what's right and what's wrong as far in their eyes. I have cousins in northern Italy.
Yes.
Every time they go past the church, they cross themselves, and 10% of their income goes to the Catholic Church.
Wow.
Which we don't.
No.
And it really is personal choice. I mean, and as you saw in outside the Vatican, the more waiting, it was great excitement. It was like a wedding, waiting for it all to happen. But the power that the church actually has, and I actually think that this Pope will be a good Pope because he understands how power can be used not in a bad way, but in a good way.
How do you know that? How do you know
Well,
that?
I don't.
Oh,
I don't.
okay.
None of us do, but we hope.
No, but where does your hope come from? What is it based on? I mean, and don't say hope. You can't base your hope on hope alone.
No, you can't. You can't base your hope.
But why do you think that? Because of his association with Francis? Because he's perceived as being a continuation of what he represents?
Yes, very much so. And he was appointed by Francis, whereas the Pope before Francis was a staunch conservative, which really didn't help things. So it's not, unfortunately, it's not going to bring, he has promoted women into the church, but not further up the line. That we're a very long way from that.
I think you're right.
But
he's on the progressive. That's the thing about the use of the word progressive. It's an application to the people who are qualified to be pope. So of all the people qualified to be pope, he's incredibly progressive. But compared to, I don't know, Owen Jones, he probably isn't very progressive. Or compared to, so that is of course always a relative term. Beautifully put, Christina. I was right. There was an English pope. I was slightly out on when it happened. It was in the 12th century. I think as we head into the next news, I may have a little quiz for you on what his papal name was. Not his given name, not the name he was born with. With the new pope, it would be Robert Francis Prevost, but the bloke who became an English pope. You see, I could tell you what his name was, but you'd probably cheat on the game that we're going to have. What was his papal name? What did he choose to call himself as pope? This is close to my favourite limerick so far, and it picks up on a couple of rhymes that other people have used. The challenge was in the spirit of a very strange woman called Laura Loomer, who Donald Trump apparently trusts on matters sensitive. She described the new pope as a woke Marxist pope in capital letters on Twitter. So I wanted you to write a limerick that either begins or ends with woke Marxist pope. And this is from David. I thought that I'd given up hope when they plumped for that tangerine dope. But then with a lurch, the Catholic Church elected a woke Marxist pope. That's nice, right? That's a pretty good one. There once, this is from Dan, was a woke Marxist pope. Trump thought him a dumb, worthless joke. He came from Chicago, avoided Mar-a-Lago, which in the long run may give some of us hope. That's not bad either. David's still, I think, slightly ahead. There once was a woke Marxist pope, writes Sandy, who looked at the US and said, nope. I'm afraid that my stance is different from Vance, and in so doing, he gave the world hope. There's a lot of people going for Pope, dope and hope on this. Someone went for soap, but that was a really bad limerick that I won't be reading out on the radio. The white smoke gave Catholics hope that Pope Leo would help them to cope. The lady who's bitter piped up on Twitter and called him a woke Marxist pope. So I'm only reading out the ones that properly scan. I'm not doing a limerick that doesn't do the tumty. And that's another good one. There once was a woke Marxist pope who didn't offer Laura much hope. That's the woman who called him a woke Marxist pope. He rattled her perch by his role in the church, that naughty old woke Marxist pope. Bit of a cop-out, the repetition there, but again, not bad. Jacob's in Oxford. Jacob, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, I got a message from my mum and said, Jay O'Brien's doing a...
phoning about the Pope, and the phone line's not good enough. I have a feeling Jacob is a theology student at Oxford University. He's probably been slightly blindsided by the fact that we just read out 6 Pope-related limericks shortly before he came on, and he found himself wondering, what has my mother let me in for on this occasion? But we will get him back on because I want to know what he thinks the role of the Pope is in the 21st century. Oh, no, he's back. Shall we give the phone line another go? Go on then, Jacob. Talk me through the significance of both the office and the new appointment in 2025.
Hi, sorry about that.
That's all right.
So basically, I think I'm a Protestant, and I found my faith about a year or so ago, and I was very influenced by the service of Pope Francis.
Right.
And it essentially made me think that the Pope is still a model of Christian living and some sort of spiritual guide, even to those who don't have any sort of obligation to him.
Yeah.
And I think that in the world we have today is really, really positive. And one thing I've always thought about the papacy is that every single thing you say matters, and everything is watched, and so everything is thought through. So even when he first came onto the balcony and he said, "Peace be with you all."
Yes.
And we're in a world that is more tumultuous and sort of scary than ever. And he's bringing this message of peace. And I think there's obviously sort of theological things that I could go into, but there is a geopolitical significance for a lot of people.
I've got an A-level. You can go into them if you want. I've got an A-level in theology. I'll be all right. I can't speak for anybody else, Jacob. We'll probably leave them behind. But I'm up for a chat about the ontological question or the Oxford movement or whatever it might be that you were thinking of alluding to.
Well, I think what Pope Francis showed us was that there was a change of tone in the papacy.
Yes.
And it moved much more from laying down the law and making sure dogma was clear. You know, when Benedict first came in, it was saying no to this and no to that.
Yeah,
you can't do this.
Yeah.
And he brought this ethic that actions speak louder. And he kissed the feet of Sudanese leaders who were at war. And he washed the feet of prisoners. And he dined with trans people in the Vatican. And he showed us that these small actions can have an effect on not just Catholics, but people around the world. And what we saw is that with his sort of, after he on social media with people saying, "Oh, I'm an atheist, but I love this Pope. I'm a Muslim, but I love this Pope." And those actions gave him that.
You've smashed it. You've absolutely nailed it.
I believe.
It is, isn't it? And that's part of it. I mean, the phone line is absolutely shocking, but we got enough of you. A little moment of divine intervention to really get to the heart of it. And what I would like to have asked Jacob, but perhaps you can answer this question instead, is whether or not there is a bit of a gulf here between people in non-Catholic countries and people in Catholic countries, because an awful lot of what he describes would probably have been widely reported in Ireland, but not that widely reported here. The washing of the feet of the Sudanese leaders, for example, the dining with transgender people in the Vatican, the extension of humanity to all corners of the globe at a time when people like Donald Trump are, of course, trying to deny the humanity of the people that they target, because that is one of the key tools of fascism. I'll tell you what else is interesting. That when politicians use the phrase Judeo-Christian tradition, they are simply offering up a dog whistle for hatred of Muslims, because it's a meaningless phrase in the context of the last 2,000 years. You could talk about Abrahamic religion, certainly, but that would involve all three strands. So when you hear a right-wing politician, because you'll never hear a left-wing politician say it, talk about the Judeo-Christian tradition and claiming that they somehow represent it, even as they denigrate foreigners or attack equality and diversity. It's going to be interesting to have a pope, the head of the Catholic Church, arguably the most important Christian on the planet, who really does try to live by Christian values, while people like Trump and Farage claim that they somehow represent Judeo-Christian tradition. It'd just be interesting to see how outspoken he is. I can't imagine he'll take much interest in British politics, but he may have more things to say about the current residents of the White House. It's 12:31. Amelia Cox has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:34. So there was an English Pope. This isn't a limerick. I may do some more limericks for you shortly, but there was an English Pope, and his real name was, would you believe, Nicholas Breakspear, looking at the late 12th century, if memory serves. But what name did he take as Pope? Here's a little quiz for you. Please don't cheat, okay? I'm going to give you 4 possibilities, and I'm really interested to know how this one breaks down. Do you think he was called A, he chose the name Claudius, Pope Claudius; B, Adrian, Pope Adrian; C, Trevor, Pope Trevor; or D, Eugene, Pope Eugene? Did the, to my knowledge, only English Pope ever, born Nicholas Breakspear, adopt the name Claudius, Adrian, Trevor or Eugene when he became Pope? Don't phone me, but text the usual number if you're on WhatsApp, 0345 60 60 973, or you can text me on 84850 if you so desire. Before we return to Questions Catholic, I should tell you that Fraser Knight has been with the Mayor of London this morning, Sir Sadiq Khan, in Greenwich, in southeast London, where some pretty, I think we could probably use the word bold, announcements have been made with regards to London's green belt. Fraser, tell us more.
Yeah, absolutely, James. Let me tell you, it's a beautiful day for what was a rooftop press conference on a building site here in Greenwich, where the Mayor of London really has changed tact. He has decided to now support using some of London's green belt, those protected green areas, to build more homes. Now, of course, that is a controversial move. It's one that even he has accepted is not going to go down well with absolutely everybody, but he used that press conference really to tell those NIMBYs not in my backyard to keep an open mind and really to trust him on this one, because he says the housing crisis in the capital right now is worse than it's ever been. And he said right now their plan and the way we're moving with building homes isn't delivering enough. It's only delivering around 40,000 a year, whereas Sadiq Khan has told us that to meet the demand in London right now, we need closer to 90,000 homes to be built every year for at least the next decade. And that is why he now wants to look at opening up some of that green belt to allow more developments to happen. Now, in the past few minutes, I have been speaking to him about that political decision to change policy here. And this is what he had to say.
I'm not willing to duck this difficult political choice. I'm not willing to let down a generation of Londoners who can't afford to rent, let alone buy. No one's talking about touching any of our gorgeous parks. I'm the guy that not only has made sure we've planted record numbers of trees, more than 500,000, not only cleaned up our air, not only rewilded our city, but we've helped protect or increase the amount of green space in our city.
And of course, James, this comes with the government's push to build 1.5 million homes across the country. And as part of that, they are supporting the opening up of some of that green belt to allow new developments to happen. But of course, there's a lot of backlash to this already. This morning, I spent time around Bexley, where people were saying, we don't want to see houses. We live here because we want this open land. Well, Sadiq Khan's saying to them, no, we need to take bold action, because right now, councils are spending £4 million a day in London to put people in temporary accommodation, including one child, he says, in every single classroom.
Fraser, thank you. Forgive me, this isn't a gotcha question, and if you don't know the answer, that's fine. But how much power does he have to do what he's promising to do? Do we know?
Well, this is a review that's now looking at what really is classified as that protected land. And he said that councils now, he's expecting them to really focus on speeding up those planning decisions. And he said if they don't do it, then he's going to step in with his mayoral powers to make sure that it does happen. So he does have a fair bit of weight behind this.
That's something we may talk about on Monday. Great stuff. Thank you, Fraser Knight. They're live from Greenwich, where he has been listening to the mayor announce plans to build more houses on London's green belt. Do you know what the opposite of a NIMBY is? It's a YIMBY. I was reading this. I think we've got too many of these things probably in public discourse at the moment, but you've got to put the houses somewhere, he says. Just working out whether there's anywhere near his back garden where they could reasonably... I mean, there's so much building in my part of London, but none of it in my actual backyard, obviously, apart from a new gazebo. But all over the... it's not a gazebo. What do you call it? It's just... Anyway, the acceptance that we need more housing, but just not here, is something that politicians have been wrestling with throughout the ages. Claudius, Adrian, Trevor or Eugene, the only English pope we've ever had. Currently in the lead is Trevor, which has quite a nice ring to it, Pope Trevor. Also, probably you would pick a name that was quite English. It's not Trevor, unfortunately, the great English Pope. It's not Claudius. That's a bit of a red herring, really. That makes you think of emperors and Romans and things and Derek Jacobi, but it's not Claudius. Eugene, that's a promising possibility. That sounds pretty papal and foreign. Eugene. It makes me think of Greece, the film, not the byproduct. But the correct answer is Adrian. Would you believe Pope Adrian? I always thought that Adrian. It's I've just never found it a very glamorous name, but there it is, Pope Adrian. Oh, this is awkward. Adrian's in Doncaster to talk about the Pope. Adrian, what would you like to say?
Good afternoon, James. And yourself?
Very well indeed, thank you. Did you know that you had the same name as a pope?
I did. My history's not as good as yourself.
Oh, do me a
favour. But I did know that. I thought it was when you were a British pope, yes.
There it is. What made you pick up the phone? Which of the questions we've asked about the role, the influence, the seriousness, the importance? Just pick whatever angle you want, mate.
Significance.
Yes.
Significance. In terms of history, it shocked me. I thought best chance would be a Filipino pope.
Why?
In terms of demographics.
Okay.
How many they had. And he was tipped as a favourite.
Was he?
Yes. I'm a lapsed Catholic as well.
Aren't we all, mate? Aren't we all, Adrian?
Yeah. I've been lapsed since I was 7 years of age. So
Okay.
no input there. But when I found out he was American, I just thought there's a lot of thought gone into this very, very quickly. Yeah.
Really?
Opportunity. Were you aware that J.D. Vance went to visit Francis just before
I was.
he passed away?
It reminded me of the time Liz Truss visited the Queen just before she passed away.
Exactly. We may be onto something there, but we'll take the Fifth Amendment. Yeah.
But he's a convert, and the new fella has already slapped Vance down on social media on one or two occasions because he ain't no Catholic, bruv. It would be my response to some of the things that J.D. Vance appears to be in favour of politically. This guy seems to be the real deal.
Yeah, I think so. I think he'll have a degree of articulate relevance to the American public. Also, I think he's from Chicago, isn't he?
He is, yeah, he is.
And I made the immediate jump that Obama was from Chicago, wasn't he?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. So it becomes a sort of almost a sort of rival court.
Yes, and that's where I'm going.
And that is why you think it was a very deliberate decision by the College of Cardinals, who must be worried I mean, they didn't cover themselves in glory. I say they, Adrian, you know, and I know it's actually we, but Catholics didn't cover themselves in glory last time fascism was on the march in the Western world. So it could be that the Cardinals have seen the metaphorical smoke coming out of the White House and decided that this time we need to be on the right side of history.
Yes, and also it relevance back to when me and you were kids. I thought of Pope John
Paul II. Pope John Paul II, yeah, Polish guy who really was. Yeah, you're right. The more we talk about it, the more significant it all begins to look, and the less coincidental, perhaps. Take care, Adrian. I got a lovely message a moment ago from someone called Nicholas Breakspear. He said, my name is Nicholas Breakspear, so I get asked about the English Pope quite a lot. And it reminded me of this message that came in at the top of the show. I bet he's not even listening anymore. Good morning, James. Absolutely love the show. Pure legend in my eyes. It's a good way to open if you want to get your message read out on the show. I've got a quick one for you. My name is Daniel Hannan, but I'm not the MP. I'm just a normal working person struggling through life, and every time you mention the other one, I cringe. I'm a Royal Navy submariner who has used your show, this is lovely, that's why I'm reading it out, as part of my recovery with mental health. It calms my mind and was recommended to me by my older brother who lives in Taiwan. That's a lovely message. I'm behind you all the way. I listen to the show. Keep up the good work and thank you for what you do. Daniel, you keep up the good work. Flipping heck. Royal Navy submariner, rather more important role in life than I'm currently playing, but that was lovely. There's almost a phone in, isn't there, in names of people. A name you had that was perfectly innocuous, and then someone famous came along, or infamous, and suddenly your name becomes incredibly loaded, much more loaded than it was previously. I don't know, but thank you for that. What do you do when you see someone who, like that, a submariner, you want to pay proper homage to the fact that they do something in the national interest? I was on the tube this morning and there was a fella in full RAF bib and tucker, in full uniform. And I'm 99% certain he got off at St James's Park. So I'm 99% certain he's going to Buckingham Palace. And if you're going to Buckingham Palace in full uniform, you're probably picking up a medal, right? Is that right? Do you think? Is that, or could you just be attending? You could just be attending a garden party, couldn't you? So I just wanted to ask. I just wanted to sort of say, are you off to? And if he was going off to pick a medal, I wanted to congratulate him, and I didn't because I thought that would be weird, and that's because I'm English. I bet if I was in Rome or Italy, then we'd probably have had a little breakout in song in the carriage. It's 12:45.
James O'Brien on LBC.
God, send me stuff like this, and they expect me to hold it together, Steve. Can I read this one out? I don't know if I mean, I certainly can't read it all out. But talking about names, I've heard from a James O'Brien. Wow, what a blessing that must be. Although I can't believe you dare to describe yourself as the younger model. Steve has sent me a message. I'm flirting with... What? You don't even know what it says? What? Well, I can blank out a word, can't I? Or not? No? All right, then. Well, you just have to ask Steve then, won't you, if what he sent to me. I'll read you the first line. I Googled my name and found a man, not me, who had been arrested for... Someone spotted him from a passing train and had him arrested. True story. There you go. That was fine. You see, you thought I was only going to miss out one word, and I missed out three. It's 12:48. Talia is in Estepona to steer the conversation back to His Eminence, the new Pope. Talia, what would you like to say?
Well, I'd like to say that when I saw this Pope that I'd chosen, I kind of breathed a sigh of relief.
Why?
I was born in Argentina, very Italian heritage, very Catholic family.
Conservative,
although I'm not Catholic myself.
Okay.
Yes, conservative. I'm not Catholic myself, but I went to a Catholic school, and I wouldn't say that the Pope for my family is a leader as such, you know.
Right,
but he is a reference and someone they fall onto when they have like moral doubts. And because this last Pope Francis, I believe, was a little bit more about acceptance rather than condemnation. I had a few members of my family that were gay and lesbian, and they weren't accepted at all many years ago. You know, they lived completely hidden. I mean, we were a younger generation, so we kind of knew, but the older generation didn't want to know.
Oh, so it's a leadership by example. Acceptance being something that you can almost learn by osmosis. You see the Pope doing it, and you find it easier to do yourself.
Well, yes, exactly.
That's beautiful.
It's a kind of chicken and egg. You don't know whether, as a society, when I go back to Argentina, I see changes all the time. So I don't know whether the social change and the church follows it or the church leads. I think it's like a I don't know. They do it together. They kind of change together.
And it's a huge. It's a brilliant point that you make because, of course, I suppose for millions of Catholics, the Pope holds an epic position in their consciousness, even if they don't spend an awful lot of time thinking about it. And if their consciousness also includes a prejudice, and the Pope becomes an emblem of opposition to that prejudice or undoing that prejudice, then the power is soft but considerable, isn't it? It does.
Yes, absolutely. And also it kind of gives you, like a reference point. You can bounce back. You can have a discussion with someone and say, your cousin, he shouldn't be living in sin, it's sinful. And you kind of say, but this sin can be accepted rather than condemned. And so you kind of smooth that. For my family and for a lot of...
neither you nor I consider it to be a sin, but we're not the Pope.
Well, no, absolutely. A lot of... 20, 30 years ago, at least in Argentina, and then, I live in Spain now, and in some areas of Spain, this was a big thing,
That's really true, yeah. And that's another thing that I think perhaps we lose sight of slightly as a consequence of not being in a Catholic country. Can I ask you a really weird question?
Go on.
Is there still a go-kart track in Estepona?
Yes,
Thank
is.
goodness for that.
Yes.
Thank goodness for
There's
that.
a back.
Very,
Yes,
very happy
well-
memories of that go-kart track, Talia. It may have moved in the ensuing 40-odd years, but goodness me, I thought I was going to be the next Nigel Mansell for one afternoon in Spain in the 1980s. 12:51 is the time. Speaking of foreign countries, I love the story of the superstar DJ, absolutely on top of his game in this country, who just announced completely out of the blue that he was knocking it all on the head and moving to Australia to start again. Do you know who I'm talking about? I bet you do. If you're my age, you do. I'm talking about Christian O'Connell, who has pulled it off in spectacular fashion, but whose decision to make that extraordinary change, to hang up his headphones, and he had some of the biggest jobs in the business, and take the whole family to Australia and as a relative unknown or a complete unknown and just start again. I didn't know the full details of what had led up to that and why he's done it. So I sat down with him a couple of weeks ago for full disclosure, and that was one of the many, many things that we talked about. I always feel a bit impostery when I'm with people like Christian or Chris Moyles or Chris Evans, actually, when people who have just got radio absolutely in their blood. But I went to a lovely memorial for like a celebration of Steve Wright's the other day. I told you about it at the BBC. And I realised something really interesting that I'd also began to think during the interview with Christian. I've always thought of myself as this is very self-indulgent, by the way, so it won't take more than 20 seconds. I've always thought of myself as a newspaper man who ended up on the radio. But I'm not. I'm a radio man who had a brief diversion into newspapers. I love this stuff more than I could ever have loved working on newspapers. What I didn't do was grow up with radio in my blood in the way that people like Christian and Moyles and Evans did. But that's because my dad was a newspaper man. Our radio is all that I ever want to do for the rest of my life. So how can I be a newspaper man who ended up on the radio? Anyway, here is Christian O'Connell talking to me about that extraordinary moment in his life where he just decided to rip it all up and start all over again.
I think for a couple of years before, maybe a year or two, I'd started to do an impersonation of myself on the radio because the show was going so well, and so and it worked really well. Everyone was happy, but some part of me I wasn't, and it was a kind of, I won't say midlife crisis. I think it's a really reductive thing, and actually. Since talking about what I went through, the wonderful thing is you open up all these conversations, and turns out no one gets through their 40s without experiencing some kind of, if you want to call it a crisis, or some kind of awakening, or basically shit gets real in your 40s. Yeah. I laugh at 30-years at work on my team now. They go, I have a very tough time. When are you? Well,
pull up a chair.
You get to your 40s, because actually there's so much that happens, and it should happen for a reason. It's an opportunity. Sure. But at the time, it's easy to say that now, the benefit of how I'm coming through it. But it didn't feel like that. It was a kind of, it felt like a death of something, of some part of me or my life, and what would I do? Where would I be? Will my wife leave me? Real big, proper fear. And also, there was also a part of me that was like, God, I just thought that was what I was meant to do. I was just confused. And a lot of big
existential
questions. Then. No, it was, James. Yeah, it really was. But also then with a real physiological thing going on, of panic attacks.
Terrifying.
And they call attacks a reason you do think you're going to die.
Yeah, you can't. You've either had one or you don't know.
Yeah, so it's actually very hard for people to understand unless they've experienced it. And so they were awful. But again, my wife encouraged me to go and get help. And I remember reluctantly going to see this therapist the first time. And he said, "You're right." And I was like, "No, not really. I don't really want to be here." And he goes, "Oh, okay, yeah, I get that." He goes, "But you are, and why are you?" And he was a really funny guy, and which I needed actually. And I went, "Well, I think therapy is for people who fucked up in life and stuff like that." And he goes, "God, that's a nice way to see it." And he goes, "Is that how you view why you're here?" And then straight away we're into a proper conversation. I was struggling, and then that he helped me understand that actually I went into therapy and trying to just get rid of panic attacks. I said, "I need you to get rid of it." And he went, "Well, there we go. It. Where is it?" If I knew where it was, he goes, "Oh, a billionaire surgeon that could cut anxiety and panic attacks out of people." It's something that's in you crying out for attention, and we've got to find out what that is. But if you says it, you're going to get in your own way. and it'll be a long time if we get on the radio show.
Wow.
And so, there was a journey there with going through all of that, and I did manage to stop it becoming an it.
What was it?
It was me actually not listening to some part of me that I think had been going for maybe 10, 20 years, and actually just actually looking after that. I think I'd had anxiety throughout all my life, but just got very good at distracting myself.
All right, lovely bloke, lovely chat that as well. Christian O'Connell, my guest on this week's Full Disclosure, probably best known for being Sheila Fogarty's partner on Celebrity Pointless.
We were dreadful. We got 200 points. Oh, God, and it was pop music as well.
Let's have a go. We'd be all right together.
We should have a go, yeah. We're clever, aren't we?
Yeah, let's have a word with Armstrong when he comes off Classic FM.
Let's see if we can do it again.
Going to pull some strings. This is rather nice from Rach, who is the mother of Jacob, who was the theology student at Oxford University who rang in earlier. And you could tell he'd been told to by his mum, because he sounded as if he couldn't quite believe he'd ended up on the radio in the middle of me reading out limericks about a woke Marxist Pope. But Rach writes, I'm Jacob's mum. That's how I know. I'm generally agnostic, but the fact that seeing Pope Francis affected Jacob so much on his trip to Rome has by extension also touched my life and made me think more deeply about a lot of issues as a result. I have hope that those holding some of the values linked to acceptance, humility, tolerance and community, whatever their religious beliefs, will eventually shine through. Even the human heart is slightly left of centre. I would agree with that, Rach, and I'll fight anyone who argues with it. I don't think I can squeeze in Sharon in Brussels, but I've got 1 minute. I can't really. I'll just say hello. Sharon, how are you?
I'm good, thank you.
No, thank you. Anything nice lined up for the weekend?
Some swimming.
So, and will you be going to church on Sunday?
No.
Well, there it is. At the end of our Catholicism conversation. And what could be more apt than two Catholics having a chat who probably won't be going to church on Sunday? It is coming up to, will you be going to church on Sunday?
I think I might this weekend.
I thought I might this week.
Pope.
But there won't be a letter or anything like that yet, will there?
There'll be a mention of him.
There'll be a mention of him. He'll get a shout out from the pulpit, as I believe the kids call it.
Yeah.
What a lovely week. Thank you. And a lovely day today, a lovely show today. If you missed any of it, you can listen back on Catch Up on both Global Player and the LBC app, where you can stay up to date on all the top stories and opinion and put your news categories into the order you want. You can also, of course, pause and rewind live radio and listen to a range of podcasts. Download the official LBC app for free from your app store now. Tom Sorbick with you at 4 on LBC. But now, as you may have gathered, it's time for Sheila Fogarty.
James O'Brien on LBC.